I grew up in a household dominated by my parents' extreme favoritism toward my older sister, Christina. My entire childhood, I felt like I was nothing but a prop to make her look better. She was given better clothes, was sent to fancy camps, and got all kinds of praise for the smallest achievements. Meanwhile, I had to figure things out on my own. Mom and Dad always told me it was because Christina was special and needed extra attention. But in reality, I suspect she reminded them of the perfect child they'd always dreamed of, while I reminded them of how tough parenting really is. Still, I always tried to keep the peace, even when it meant stuffing down my frustration. I was the classic good kid who never wanted to make waves. It's no wonder that despite everything, I actually believed they would celebrate my 18th birthday properly. I'm turning 18 soon, and I guess I was naive to think it might be my chance to shine for once. I'd heard rumors they were planning a small party. I didn't have many close friends because I rarely got permission to hang out after school, but I still felt grateful they were planning something at all. I kept telling myself, maybe this time they'd finally treat me like an equal. That's why, when the day came closer, I was more excited than I'd ever been. It felt like a second chance, a fresh start into adulthood. I was about to learn exactly how much my parents valued me and how deep their betrayal could run. My parents initially hinted they'd rent a small space and invite a few family friends, plus any of my classmates I wanted to bring. That was all I knew. Christina acted suspiciously uninterested, which was weird because she usually tried to upstage me at every opportunity. She was the type who would show off her new dress if it even tangentially competed with something I had going on. This time, though, she seemed almost bored. I should have noticed the red flags, but I chalked it up to her usual mood swings. The day before my birthday, I asked Mom what time the party would start. She said, "Oh, about 7, but remember, don't get your hopes up, okay? It's just a small gathering." I shrugged it off. Even if it was small, I still thought it was better than nothing. Little did I know, there would be no party at all. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up giddy. I got dressed in my nicest outfit and tried to help out around the house, hoping to show my parents I was grateful. But something felt off. There were no decorations, no food preparations, and zero mention of anything special. I asked Dad if we should pick up a birthday cake. He gave me a blank look, like he had no idea what I was talking about. Then he muttered something about me needing to watch my attitude. Confused, I tried to clarify. "Mom said there would be a small party tonight, right?" He waved me off, saying, "You must have misunderstood. There's no party. We canceled it days ago." I remember standing there, heart pounding, feeling like my entire life was one big punchline. They hadn't bothered to tell me they'd pulled the plug on my own 18th birthday. I felt a burning sensation in my eyes, but I refused to cry. I asked Dad why they canceled. He just shook his head, telling me it was none of my business. That was the moment Christina swooped in with her signature smirk. "They had to cancel because I'm having a big night with my friends, and it clashed with your thing," she said, rolling her eyes as though my birthday was an inconvenience. I turned to Mom for clarification. She shrugged, adding that they couldn't manage 2 events at once, and Christina's was more important since it involved her private dance team from college. "You'll have plenty of birthdays in the future," Mom said, dismissing me entirely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why not just do it another day? Why not let me in on the decision? The sense of betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to process it rationally, telling myself that maybe finances were tight or there was a scheduling conflict. But every time I tried to reason it out loud, they shut me down with snide comments. Dad accused me of being selfish for wanting to celebrate while the family had bigger concerns. When I pressed further, Christina started whining about how I was ruining her vibe. They ridiculed me for being dramatic and told me if I didn't like their decisions, I could leave. I should have realized that was more than an empty threat. It turned out they had another plan brewing. Meanwhile, I locked myself in my room, stared at the blank walls, and wondered if it was worth confronting them or if I should just run away. I felt like I'd never win. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, I'd be told I was ungrateful. Afternoon rolled around, and I was starving. No one had even bothered to ask if I'd eaten. The house was eerily quiet, aside from Christina blasting her music in the living room, presumably warming up for her friends. I tiptoed into the kitchen to make a sandwich, and there were dirty dishes piled up in the sink from the night before. My parents had never been consistent about chores unless they were using them as a weapon against me. Christina rarely washed a dish, and they never got on her case for it. But I always ended up with an ultimatum. My plan was to quickly rinse the dishes, make my sandwich, and go back to my room. But as soon as Mom spotted me, she exploded, claiming I'd let the dishes sit there all morning. She screeched that I was lazy and irresponsible. I tried to defend myself, but my voice got drowned out. Mom called Dad over, and together they hurled insults, saying how they were sick of my attitude and that I'd become a burden. Over dishes. Yes, I'd turned 18 that day, but they were making it clear that I was nothing more than an inconvenience in my own home. I was cornered in the kitchen, tears threatening to escape. Then Christina walked in with a condescending smile. "If she doesn't like it here, let her go live elsewhere," she said flippantly. Dad actually nodded in agreement. He told me, in no uncertain terms, to pack my things and leave. I asked where I was supposed to go, but he just shrugged, repeating that I needed to learn respect. So I went to my room, numb and shaking. Within 20 minutes, I'd thrown some clothes and essentials into a duffel bag, not knowing if I'd ever come back. Before I left, I stood at the front door, half expecting them to change their minds. It was my birthday after all. Part of me still believed there had to be some shred of paternal instinct hidden beneath all that cruelty. But they just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to walk out. I took one last look at the house where I'd grown up, felt a wave of heartbreak, and stepped onto the porch. The door slammed behind me. That was how I became homeless on my 18th birthday. Not by choice, but by the triumphant decree of my own flesh and blood. While I was standing there, I saw Christina in the window, laughing with her phone in hand, probably texting her friends about how they'd canceled my birthday. I never knew you could feel such heavy disappointment in people who were supposed to love you. I wandered around for a while, feeling aimless. Finally, I called my friend Kayla. We weren't super close, but she was one of the few people I'd hung out with after school a couple of times. She sounded shocked when I told her what happened. She told me to come over immediately, that her parents would let me crash on their couch if needed. Her kindness almost made me break down in tears. I took the bus to her house, and her mom welcomed me warmly. They didn't question me too much, just enough to understand the basics. Kayla offered me her bed, insisting she'd take the couch in the living room. I didn't want to cause trouble, but her whole family was set on making me feel at home. It felt surreal to experience that level of warmth after being kicked out. I didn't know how long it would last, but I was grateful. As I settled into Kayla's place, I spent the rest of that night scrolling through social media, wondering what my parents and sister were doing. I saw a few photos posted by Christina's friends. They were partying at our house, ironically. That must have been the real reason my birthday was canceled. They wanted the house for her own celebration. I felt sick to my stomach seeing them all having fun without even a shred of remorse. My 18th birthday, spent as a rejected outcast, while they laughed and danced in the home I used to call mine. But that wasn't even the worst part. While I scrolled, I noticed a certain name pop up in a few comments. One of Christina's friends mentioned that a special guest was still planning on coming. And that's when I remembered. My parents had told me a distant relative, Uncle Robbie, was flying in from out of state for my birthday. Uncle Robbie wasn't just any distant relative. He was a successful entrepreneur who'd built his own company from the ground up. The last time I saw him, I was about 11, and he'd been kind but somewhat aloof. He traveled a lot and rarely kept in touch with the family, but apparently, he'd offered to come to my 18th birthday as a surprise. I'd learned about it accidentally when I overheard Mom talking on the phone weeks ago. I was supposed to be none the wiser, but I'd secretly been excited that someone in my extended family cared enough to visit. Now that they'd canceled my party, they must have forgotten to let him know. If they did remember, they probably assumed he wouldn't show because they'd never told me they'd confirmed his trip. Still, the comments on Christina's post hinted that Uncle Robbie was in town and planning to drop by. I tried to imagine the scene. Uncle Robbie showing up at my house, expecting to celebrate my 18th birthday, only to find a raucous party that had nothing to do with me. A small part of me took pleasure in that scenario because maybe he'd call them out. Another part of me worried they'd twist the story and blame me for not being there. But then it dawned on me. Uncle Robbie was known for his blunt nature. If he saw how they treated me, especially on my birthday, he wouldn't hold his tongue. In fact, he had a history of cutting people out if they disrespected him or people he cared about. I recalled something about him once severing ties with a business partner over an ethics issue, so he definitely wasn't the type to brush off betrayal. That was when the seed of revenge first took root in my mind. I decided to keep quiet and let fate run its course. If Uncle Robbie showed up, my parents and sister would face some uncomfortable questions, but I also wanted more than just a moment of awkwardness for them. I wanted them to feel the sting of their betrayal the way I'd felt it. I'd never been a vindictive person by nature, but getting kicked out on my 18th birthday was the last straw. Kayla's mother overheard me on the phone that evening and saw how distraught I was. She gently suggested that sometimes truth has a way of coming out on its own. She also offered me a chance to stay as long as I needed. I thanked her and promised I wouldn't overstay my welcome. Then I spent the rest of the night strategizing about how to ensure Uncle Robbie learned the full scope of what had happened. Knowing my parents, they'd attempt to spin a sob story about how I was an ungrateful brat who stormed out. If they realized Uncle Robbie would be attending, they'd likely scramble to cover their tracks. But the advantage was that I'd overheard nothing about them reaching out to cancel his visit. My guess was that they were so focused on Christina's event, they completely forgot. The next day, Kayla and I crafted a plan. She suggested I text Christina from a burner phone number, pretending to be one of her acquaintances, and ask if Uncle Robbie was actually coming. That way, I'd have some confirmation. I used a phone app to generate a random number and asked if everything was set for Uncle Robbie's arrival. Christina replied with a flurry of frantic messages, basically confirming that she had no idea how to get in touch with him and that my parents were furious with me for bailing on my party. Later that day, Kayla and I did some detective work on social media. We discovered that Uncle Robbie had posted a photo in a nearby hotel lobby just hours ago. He captioned it with something like, "Back in town for a special birthday, hoping it's as fun as promised." Perfect. He was definitely here. Now, all I needed was to time my arrival to coincide with his visit. I figured he'd show up to the house in the evening, expecting a family gathering. My parents and sister would probably try to pass off Christina's leftover mess as some half-baked attempt at a party. So I asked Kayla for a ride. We borrowed her mom's car under the premise that we were running an errand and headed toward my old neighborhood. My heart was beating a mile a minute, but a spark of adrenaline kept me focused on the upcoming confrontation. We parked a block away, waiting for any sign of Uncle Robbie. After about 30 minutes, a black rental SUV pulled up in front of the house, and out stepped a tall figure in a sharp suit, definitely Uncle Robbie. He knocked on the door, and from my vantage point, I saw my parents greet him with exaggerated warmth. Christina was behind them, wearing a forced smile. They ushered him in, and the door closed. I checked my reflection in the car window, steeled myself, and told Kayla to drive me right to the driveway. As I walked toward the house, my stomach churned with anticipation. Kayla trailed behind me for support, though she promised not to interfere unless things got out of hand. I rang the doorbell, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. Finally, Dad opened the door, his face dropping at the sight of me. I pushed past him, ignoring his attempts to block me. Uncle Robbie was in the living room setting down a small gift box, presumably for me. Christina and Mom were standing awkwardly near the couch. When Uncle Robbie saw me, his eyes lit up. "There's the birthday girl," he said, extending his arms for a hug. I hesitated for a moment before letting him embrace me. The tension in the room was palpable. Christina shot me a glare that could melt steel, and Mom's face was flushed. Uncle Robbie pulled back, looking confused by the atmosphere. "What's going on here?" he asked, directing his question to everyone but mostly eyeing the awkward stance of my parents. That's when I let it all spill out. I told him how they canceled my birthday without telling me, how I got kicked out over dirty dishes, and how I'd been staying with a friend ever since. My parents tried to interrupt, but I raised my voice, a thing I'd never done before. I demanded they let me speak. I explained how I'd discovered the party was canceled only that morning, how I was thrown out on my 18th birthday, and how I'd been blindsided by their cruel behavior. Christina tried to spin it, accusing me of blowing things out of proportion. She said I left on my own. I held up my phone, showing texts I'd sent to Dad that day, begging him to reconsider and let me stay. Then I turned to Uncle Robbie and said, They never told me you were coming. I only found out through social media. They were too busy hosting a party for Christina last night to care about my birthday. I just wanted you to know the truth." My voice trembled, but I managed to keep from crying. Uncle Robbie's expression darkened. He looked at my parents, waiting for some explanation, but they stood there, fumbling for excuses. Mom stammered something about discipline and respect. Dad tried to claim I'd been rebellious for months. But Uncle Robbie cut them off with a wave of his hand. Then he turned to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and asked if I had somewhere safe to stay. I told him I'd been staying with a friend, but it was only temporary. He nodded, then calmly announced that he would not be associating with people who treated their child in such a demeaning way. Christina started whining about how it was all a big misunderstanding. Uncle Robbie's gaze flicked to her, and he said something that made my heart swell with gratitude. "Mistreating your sister on her birthday is not a misunderstanding. It's cruelty, pure and simple." My parents gaped, and I saw Dad's face twist with panic. Uncle Robbie quietly led me to my old bedroom, allowing me to collect what little remained. My parents trailed behind, stammering apologies now that they realized he'd planned a generous college fund. I refused to forgive them. They had exposed their true colors by kicking me out on my 18th birthday. I gathered my belongings, ignoring their attempts to guilt-trip me. In the living room, Uncle Robbie announced he would place the money under my sole control. My father erupted, yelling that I was turning family against him, but Uncle Robbie silenced him with a warning glance. Without a backward look, I left alongside my uncle, determined never to return. It was the sweetest revenge. No forgiveness, no second chances, just a clean break and the promise of a better life. My parents had betrayed me for the last time, and they'd never benefit from my success. I felt nothing but triumphant relief. I'm still not entirely sure how to wrap my head around what happened, but since so many of you have asked me for details, I'm going to lay it all out. My parents always favored my younger sister, and I never expected them to go this far. Whenever I think about how I came home from a 3-month trip to find my car gone, I feel my anger spike. After spending years working, saving, and hustling, I finally took time to travel, something I believed I deserved. I left my car in my parents' driveway, trusting it would stay put. But as soon as I got back, I saw it was missing. At first, I thought maybe they'd moved it, but then my mother casually informed me they'd sold it. Her reasoning was jaw-dropping. They'd used the money to fund my sister's vacation because she was feeling devastated after her divorce. I've always known she was the golden child, but I never imagined they'd outright steal from me for her sake. It wasn't just a few dollars. They forged my signature, ignoring the fact that the title was in my name. They didn't apologize. They felt entitled. My father said I'd hardly been using the car, so what's the harm? I was livid. This wasn't some minor inconvenience, but a blatant violation of trust. I confronted them, and they shrugged it off, telling me I should be supportive of my sister, especially during her heartbreak. I felt betrayed. This was the final straw. I'd always endured their favoritism, but this time, they crossed a line. As I stood there, stunned, I knew I couldn't let this slide. They kept talking about family unity, but they failed to see the hypocrisy. I decided right then I was done bending. If they thought I'd forgive and move on, they were mistaken. This time, I'd fight back legally, financially, and emotionally. That car wasn't just property. It was my independence, my hard-earned asset. I felt the sting of betrayal in my gut, and all I could think was that they'd regret underestimating me. I went to my old bedroom, locked the door, and tried to process everything. They'd effectively robbed me of something I'd worked so hard for. I'd bought that car with my own money, saved from freelancing gigs and late-night shifts. My parents had contributed nothing, yet they felt justified in selling it off like some family heirloom. My sister, of course, was already sunbathing in some tropical spot, posting pictures online of her cocktails and tour packages. It stung to see her smiling while I was left to pick up the pieces of my uprooted life. I'd planned to use that car to commute to a new job opportunity I was pursuing. Now I had to figure out transportation on top of dealing with the emotional fallout of their betrayal. I might have stayed under their roof for a few days after returning, but there was no chance of that now. My father had the nerve to tell me I was overreacting. Overreacting? They sold my car without my permission, and forged my name on the paperwork. In what world is that not a crime? Every time I tried to confront them, they fell back on the same tired excuses. She needed a break. She's going through a divorce. We are family. We have to help each other. But apparently, help only flowed in one direction. For years, I'd taken care of my own needs while my sister got endless handouts. I left that night, staying at a friend's place because I couldn't stand another minute in that house. My mother texted me, playing the victim, claiming she couldn't sleep because I was being so harsh. Harsh? I called it reality. I told her I planned to get the authorities involved unless they returned the money immediately. She tried to call my bluff, saying there was no proof I hadn't given them permission. That's when I realized I needed to act swiftly. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I was done trying to reason with people who saw nothing wrong with theft. My friend thought I was brave for taking such a stand, but I was mostly fueled by rage and a sense of justice. It wasn't about vengeance at first. It was about not being a doormat anymore. A few days later, I found out more details about how they'd managed to sell the car. My mother had apparently sweet-talked a local dealership, spinning a story about how I'd gone abroad for longer than expected and needed to offload the vehicle. She forged my signature on the release forms, then pocketed the money. To make matters worse, she'd even bragged to a family friend about her cleverness, telling them my sister deserved every bit of that luxury escape to cheer her up. When I confronted her with this information, she immediately blamed my father, saying he'd been the one to push the sale. My father, in turn, blamed her, claiming he'd just gone along because she said it was already arranged. Their willingness to toss each other under the bus told me everything I needed to know about their moral compass. They were finally scared because I'd mentioned legal consequences. The forging of my signature alone could lead to criminal charges. Still, they kept trying to guilt-trip me. My father even said, "You're not going to put your own parents in jail, are you?" As if I was the monster. At that point, I was determined to see this through, but I did weigh my options carefully. Pressing criminal charges against my own parents was heavy, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't tear me up inside. They were the only parents I had, but they were also the ones who'd made a mockery of my trust. I booked another meeting with my lawyer, who advised I document every interaction. So I saved texts, voicemails, and screenshots of my sister's fancy trip posts, evidence they'd spent significant money on her travel. I also reached out to a friend who worked at a financial institution just to get advice on how bank transfers might be traced. My plan was to ensure that every penny they'd received was accounted for. I wanted a clear trail leading back to them. My mother called me in tears when she heard I was being so methodical. She begged me to drop it, offering to pay me back when they could. But I knew they didn't have nearly enough savings to reimburse me, nor did I trust them to keep any promise. The more people I spoke to, the more outraged they were on my behalf. Old classmates and coworkers who heard the story couldn't believe it. A few suggested I post about it online to get advice or even sympathy, but I was wary of airing family drama in public. Deep down, I was still struggling with the emotional impact. Even if my parents had always been biased, I never thought they'd stoop to literal theft. But here I was, dealing with the aftermath. My sister was conveniently unreachable during her vacation, which I assumed was funded by the money they got from my car. Occasionally, I'd see an update on social media, her beaming face at some scenic spot, hashtagging it #new beginnings. I guess she didn't realize her new beginning came at the cost of my property. When she finally did return my call, she acted clueless. She insisted she had no idea how our parents had suddenly afforded to send her on this dream getaway. That infuriated me more because I knew how gullible my parents could be, but my sister wasn't stupid. She had to suspect something was amiss. We argued and she tried to flip it on me, saying, "I can't believe you're making a big deal out of this. You know how miserable I've been." I hung up on her. There was no point in reasoning with someone who saw nothing wrong with benefiting from stolen funds. My lawyer eventually helped me draft a letter of demand outlining the amount they owed me for the car's market value, along with potential damages for the forgery. My parents panicked upon receiving it, calling me multiple times. They left desperate voicemails, cycling between anger, guilt, and pleas for forgiveness. But I had no intention of letting them off easy. This wasn't just a spat, it was a serious offense. I told them if they wanted to avoid a civil suit, and potentially criminal charges, they'd need to repay me in full within a reasonable time frame and sign an admission of wrongdoing. No more excuses, no more manipulations. My sister started calling me again, claiming she would sell some of her possessions to help pay me back. She wanted me to see that she cared about fixing the situation. I told her I wasn't interested in half-baked measures. If she was truly sorry, she'd have confronted our parents the moment she learned the money for her trip was stolen from me. Instead, she'd happily posted pictures of her fancy spa sessions. She tried to say that her divorce had drained her emotionally, that she needed something to look forward to, as if that justified theft. By then, my mother's texts turned nasty, saying I was tearing the family apart and that my sister didn't deserve to be punished for wanting a bit of happiness. As if my sister's happiness was the only thing that mattered. She even tried to bring up old issues like how I'd always been distant and self-reliant, accusing me of never letting them help me. The irony was painful. They never offered genuine help, only judgments. They'd hoisted every possible excuse for their actions onto me, painting me as ungrateful. My father pulled a different card. He told me he'd ask other family members to talk sense into me. A few relatives did call, urging me to handle this discreetly. Some said, "Your parents are getting old. Do you really want to destroy them?" As if I was the villain. But a surprising number of relatives sided with me, or at least remained neutral. They understood that forging a child's signature and selling their property was indefensible. My parents' circle of defenders shrank as more details emerged. Even those who tried to remain impartial recognized that my parents had crossed a legal boundary. The last straw was when they attempted to shift the timeline, acting like I'd been gone longer than I initially said. I showed proof of my plane tickets, itinerary, and even text messages informing them of my return date. They couldn't keep their lies straight. They were grasping at straws, hoping to discredit me or lessen their guilt. The entire ordeal was exhausting, but my resolve never wavered. I wanted justice, and I was going to get it. Ultimately, the legal route became unavoidable. My parents refused to meet my lawyer's demands, and they wouldn't offer a suitable repayment plan or a written admission. My lawyer suggested we sue for the full value of the car plus damages. He also reminded me that we could, at any point, escalate to criminal charges for the forgery. The thought made my stomach churn, but a part of me felt vindicated. This wasn't some petty squabble. This was a clear violation of law. I moved forward with the civil suit, and my parents were served papers. They called me in a panic, blaming each other for allowing things to go this far. My father tried one last manipulation. "Is this really what you want, to see your parents in court?" I told him I never wanted that, but they'd left me no choice. My sister, caught in the middle, was apparently furious with both of them for not shutting this down sooner. She tried to negotiate on their behalf, offering to mediate. I refused, telling her any conversation needed to go through my lawyer. It was all business now. During this time, I learned from a cousin that my parents were going around telling everyone I was heartless and money-hungry. I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them spin a narrative where I was the bad guy for demanding what was rightfully mine. I filed the lawsuit, detailing the stolen car, the forged signature, and the emotional distress. The day they received official notice, my father called me in tears for the first time in my life. It rattled me, but I stayed firm. He talked about how he'd lose his reputation, how he might lose his home, and how this would affect their retirement. I told him he should have thought of that before selling my property to fund someone else's vacation. My mother then texted me, insisting I was destroying the family legacy and that we'd never recover from this feud. But in my mind, what was there to recover? They had decimated the relationship the moment they decided my sister's trip was more important than my rights. As we headed toward mediation, I felt a mix of dread and satisfaction. My lawyer and I arrived, paperwork in tow. My parents showed up with their own lawyer, looking exhausted. They offered a half-hearted settlement that barely covered half the value of the car and none of the additional damages. My lawyer calmly explained why that wouldn't be acceptable, and we laid out the evidence of their wrongdoing. The mediator tried to see if there was any emotional ground to salvage, but it was clear I wasn't budging on the numbers. My mother burst into tears, accusing me of being cruel and ungrateful. She said everything they'd done was for family. I retorted that forging signatures and stealing was hardly a family value. After hours of back and forth, they finally caved to a better settlement, full reimbursement for my car's fair market value, plus partial coverage of my legal fees. They balked at the idea of paying for emotional distress, but I demanded something to address it. We settled on an additional sum, not huge, but enough to make a statement. My parents were furious, my mother sobbing as she signed. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. In truth, I guess I'd become one. I signed the agreement, ensuring everything was legally binding and that they couldn't back out. Then the mediator asked if anyone wanted to say anything else for closure. I simply said I wanted nothing more from them. My sister tried to approach me, tears in her eyes, but I shook my head. I walked out of that room feeling a strange numbness, as if years of pent-up frustration had finally been released, leaving me both lighter and more hollow than before. In the weeks that followed, news spread among our extended family. Some took my side wholeheartedly, calling my parents out for their blatant theft. Others wrung their hands about how I'd allowed things to escalate, but I knew that was just their discomfort with confrontation. My sister, upon learning the extent of what our parents had to pay, complained to me that she was indirectly suffering because they could no longer bankroll her as they used to. She acted as though I owed her an apology for not letting it slide. It was almost comical. I blocked her after that. I had nothing left to say. My parents transferred the settlement money in increments, following the schedule laid out in the legal agreement. Each transaction felt surreal. They'd stolen from me, and now they were forced to pay me back. My lawyer reminded me that if they missed a payment, we could hold them in contempt of the agreement, potentially pushing for harsher consequences. I felt no satisfaction from imagining them behind bars, but I also felt no urge to protect them if they decided to violate the settlement. Throughout this process, I caught glimpses of them trying to play happy families on social media, posting pictures of barbecues or get-togethers as though nothing was wrong. I wanted to feel anger, but mostly, I felt relief. I was done. Their manipulations, their guilt trips, their blatant favoritism, they no longer had power over me. My new life began as soon as I deposited that final payment into my account. I used some of the money to buy a better car than the one they'd sold, a symbolic upgrade. I looked at it in the driveway of my apartment and felt a sense of reclaiming my dignity. I also started planning future travels, reaffirming that my life goals wouldn't be derailed by their betrayal. Their actions had forced me to stand my ground in a way I never had before. Over time, I heard rumors that my parents were struggling financially because of the settlement. They'd apparently tapped into their retirement funds to cover the costs and were scaling back their lifestyle. My sister wasn't getting her usual handouts, and that tension was splitting the family further. Some relatives asked if I'd consider forgiving them now that the money issue was resolved. But I made it clear that forgiveness wasn't on the table. They didn't just make a mistake, they made a calculated decision to exploit me, forging documents and lying without remorse until legal pressure forced them to face the truth. The betrayal went too deep for any quick reconciliation. A cousin tried to broker a family meeting, but I declined. I had no interest in listening to more excuses. My mother sent a long email blaming the stress of my sister's divorce, claiming they were desperate to cheer her up. She said they never wanted to hurt me. I never responded. My father tried calling me on my birthday, presumably to extend an olive branch, but I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail, where he mumbled something about wanting to move forward. Still, not one word of genuine apology, only a plea for me to stop holding on to resentment. But I wasn't resentful. I was just done. There's a difference. I created this throwaway account because I need to get this off my chest. My life has turned into a soap opera in the space of a few weeks, and I still feel like I'm reeling. I've been married to Carla for 7 years. I have a daughter from my first marriage, but she's in college overseas. Carla has a daughter, Sasha, who's been living with us since we tied the knot. For the past 5 years, I thought we were a happy, blended family. I worked hard to put a roof over our heads, to give Sasha a stable home, and to support Carla's dream of opening her own dance studio. Looking back, it's twisted how I funded everything while living in total ignorance. I'm not the type to go snooping, but one night, Carla's phone was on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. She was in the shower, so I picked it up to mute it. That's when I saw a text from someone named Sam, and it was explicit enough to make my heart pound. It wasn't just racy flirting. It mentioned secret hotels, dinner dates, and inside jokes. I put down the phone and tried to breathe, but my mind was spinning with 1,000 scenarios. I didn't confront Carla right away. Instead, I spent the next few days examining our cell phone bills, scanning her emails, and noticing every suspicious move. What I discovered horrified me. Carla had been carrying on a full-blown affair with Sam for 5 years. Worse, Sasha had been helping hide it, intercepting calls, lying about Carla's whereabouts, and even letting Sam into our home. My world fell apart in those moments of realization, and I knew I had to plan my next steps carefully. I felt fury unimaginable like never before. I waited another week before confronting them, gathering every bit of evidence to ensure there was no wiggle room. I felt numb, yet hyper-focused, scanning Carla's emails, saving text screenshots, and noting any suspicious transactions. It sickened me to discover hotel receipts dated during times she claimed to be on business trips. Meanwhile, messages between Sasha and Carla showed how they coordinated everything. Sasha would distract me or lie about Carla's whereabouts. The deeper I dug, the more my stomach churned. This wasn't a mistake or a one-night stand. It was a 5-year con, and I was their oblivious cash cow. When I finally had enough, I came home early and set a hidden camera in the living room. Within days, I had clear footage of Carla and Sam together. Sam left minutes before I walked in, but he couldn't erase the evidence. I called Carla and Sasha into the room, plugged a thumb drive into the TV, and pressed play. Carla went pale. Sasha stood there, wide-eyed. I said nothing until the video ended, then demanded an explanation. Carla stuttered through excuses, claiming she never meant to hurt me. Sasha mumbled something about loyalty to her mother. I felt that cold rage settling in my chest again. I told them both to pack whatever they could carry and get out. Carla tried to argue, but I held firm. I'd pay the mortgage on that house alone before letting them stay another night under my roof. Sasha tried to beg for time, but I warned them I'd call the police if they weren't gone in an hour. Then I drove around aimlessly, ignoring my phone as it buzzed. When I returned, the house was empty, and I finally felt a sliver of relief pierce my anger. I felt no pity. After they were gone, I sat on the couch, staring at the walls. Every corner of the house felt tainted by their deception. I poured myself a stiff drink and realized I had a choice: wallow in self-pity or fight back. I chose the latter. That very night, I decided to shield myself financially. Carla and I shared checking and savings accounts, plus a mortgage. I also had multiple retirement funds. Given the overwhelming evidence of her infidelity, I suspected I could protect most of our shared assets. Early the next morning, I visited the bank. I explained the situation to the manager, who directed me to a representative familiar with marital disputes. I showed them pay stubs proving I was the primary breadwinner. With their help, I opened new accounts in my name and transferred the majority of our funds, leaving only a token amount behind. I canceled every joint credit card, updated all my passwords, and froze any lines of credit. It felt ruthless, but I was done playing the nice guy. Within hours, Carla tried calling. She must have checked our balances, found them nearly empty, and panicked. I declined her call, letting it go to voicemail. Her message was full of shrill accusations about how I destroyed our savings. She ranted that Sasha was traumatized, that they were effectively homeless. She sounded furious, but I heard fear under her words. I turned off the phone and went to my lawyer's office. I'd done my homework, and I wanted to file for divorce immediately. My lawyer agreed that I had a solid case, especially with video proof of her ongoing affair. I walked out feeling more in control than I had in days, my anger sharpening my resolve. My lawyer advised me to document everything, so I spent the weekend assembling files, printing screenshots, and copying emails. I felt like a detective building a rock-solid case. Part of me was still in disbelief that Sasha had participated so willingly. I had tried to be a decent stepfather. I paid her tuition fees for dance classes, took her to the doctor when she was sick, and never treated her differently than I treated my biological daughter. Yet she'd repaid me by covering up her mother's betrayal. Late Sunday night, Carla showed up at the door, banging and shouting to let her in. I refused. She threatened to call the police, but I told her the police would side with me since her name wasn't on the deed. She could scream all she wanted, but that house was mine. I warned her I had security cameras installed. Finally, she left, shrieking curses as she drove away. The next day, I spoke to my daughter overseas. She was furious on my behalf, urging me not to give an inch. It was reassuring to have her support, especially since I worried she might resent me for kicking Sasha out. She told me that Sasha had always seemed secretive and dismissive, and that I was better off without them. That conversation hardened my resolve. If Carla thought she could guilt me into taking them back, she was dead wrong. I started therapy that week, recognizing my anger could spiral if I didn't address it. My therapist helped me see that I was allowed to feel rage and betrayal, but I needed to channel it constructively. So I channeled it into building the best legal case possible and into protecting every asset I'd worked so hard to earn. I wouldn't let them benefit from my pain. Carla's mother tried calling me next. She claimed Sasha was only following orders and that Carla had made a mistake. I nearly laughed out loud. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, not sleeping with someone for 5 years while your daughter helps cover it up. I told her mother that I had nothing left to say. I'd hired a lawyer, filed for divorce, and secured my bank accounts. There would be no discussion unless it was through my attorney. Soon after, Carla sent a barrage of text messages from different numbers, pleading for a chance to explain. She swore she never wanted to hurt me, that she still loved me, and that she'd do anything to fix this. Her words meant nothing. If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have lied for half our marriage. I blocked every new number she used. I felt a grim satisfaction in shutting her out, the same way she had shut me out of the truth for years. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I gathered more proof. We had bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals that coincided with her rendezvous. We had text logs detailing explicit plans to meet Sam. We even had Sasha's messages, which indicated she fully understood what was happening. My lawyer said it was one of the clearest infidelity cases he'd ever seen. He felt confident I could avoid paying her spousal support altogether, given the circumstances. I also insisted on selling the house once everything was finalized. That place felt tainted by the memories of their deception. My lawyer agreed it was a wise move. Any proceeds would be mine, minus a small portion if the court mandated it. I didn't care about the inconvenience. I just wanted that place off my hands, along with every remnant of my former life with them. Finally, we had our first mediation session. Carla arrived looking worn, her eyes red and puffy. Sasha wasn't there, but Carla's attorney was a younger guy who seemed uncomfortable with the mountain of evidence stacked against them. Carla tried the waterworks routine, claiming she'd been neglected, that I was always working and left her lonely. My lawyer calmly slid photos across the table, pictures of her and Sam, timestamps of their trips, screenshots of her texts bragging about how clueless I was. Carla's tears dried up quickly. Her lawyer whispered to her, and they asked for a short break. When they returned, Carla offered to settle amicably. She wanted a share of the accounts, half the house, and some monthly support. We refused. My lawyer cited the infidelity, the deception, and the fact that Carla contributed next to nothing financially. The mediator looked exhausted, but eventually we agreed on a preliminary arrangement. Carla would get a small, one-time payout, far less than she hoped for. We still had to present it to a judge, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Sasha emailed me again from a new address. She wrote a long message about how she was just trying to protect her mother, how she felt sorry for me but didn't know how to stop the affair. She insisted she never meant to hurt me, but that she had no choice. I didn't respond. She was an adult. She could have come clean or refused to lie. Instead, she conspired against me for years. I blocked her new email too. Each step of this process felt draining but also liberating. I was standing up for myself, refusing to be the doormat they had used for far too long. Revenge tasted cold, but it was still satisfying. News traveled fast among our acquaintances. Some friends reached out, shocked by Carla's actions. Others stayed neutral or urged me to reconsider. A few even suggested that I should forgive and work on the marriage. But I wasn't interested in moral lectures from people who hadn't lived my life. If they wanted to keep Carla in their social circles, that was their choice. I was done with her. With my lawyer's guidance, I also made a strategic move to freeze Carla out of our retirement accounts. She'd contributed virtually nothing to them, so the case for keeping them separate was strong. My lawyer collected every pay stub and showed the court that I'd been the sole contributor. Carla tried to argue for a piece of that pie, citing the length of our marriage, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. The affair overshadowed everything else. Eventually, Carla's attorney reached out to mine, signaling that she was ready to accept a more modest settlement to avoid a public drawn-out trial. We hammered out the details. She'd get a small sum from our savings, and I would keep the house proceeds once it's sold. She wouldn't get monthly support, nor would she touch my retirement. It was a brutal deal for her, but entirely of her own making. My lawyer recommended we finalize it quickly, and I agreed. I wanted to move on. All this time, Sasha remained radio silent, except for that last email. I later heard she moved in with a friend, then tried returning to Carla's mother's place. Carla was apparently bouncing between friends, not quite the glamorous life she'd pictured with Sam. Part of me wondered if Sam had already dumped her. Regardless, it wasn't my concern. My only focus was severing legal ties. The day the papers were officially signed, I allowed myself a moment of bittersweet relief. I'd gotten what I wanted, freedom from their lies, financial stability, and a chance to rebuild my life. Yet, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of betrayal that still lingered. I would never get back those wasted years or the sense of security I once had. But therapy helped me accept that the pain was part of the healing process. I listed the house on the market, determined to be rid of that place. While waiting for a buyer, I gradually packed up my belongings, discarding anything that reminded me of Carla or Sasha. Old photos, trinkets, and gifts all went into the trash or donation bin. It felt symbolic, like shedding a layer of skin. Each item I let go of made me feel lighter, more in control of my own story. During this time, I also reconnected with my daughter in a deeper way. She visited for a short break, and we spent that time laughing, catching up, and sharing stories. I felt genuine happiness again, something that had been missing for too long. She assured me she had zero sympathy for Carla or Sasha. Knowing my daughter was on my side boosted my morale. The house sold faster than I expected, and I walked away with a tidy profit. Carla was entitled to nothing further, per the settlement. I closed that chapter without a backward glance. Once the sale was complete, I moved into a new apartment. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, free of memories of their betrayal. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful, like maybe there was a future beyond the anger and hurt they left behind. Every so often, rumors would reach me. Carla was crashing on someone's couch, or Sasha was complaining that I'd cut off her tuition. None of it moved me. I'd poured money into Sasha's life for years, thinking I was doing the right thing for my stepdaughter. She chose to repay me with lies and manipulation. Actions have consequences, and I owed them nothing. Occasionally, I'd get an email from some distant relative of Carla's, calling me cruel for leaving them high and dry. I never responded. They only knew Carla's sob story, not the actual betrayal. I found new routines like cooking dinners for myself, enjoying a quiet evening without walking on eggshells. I started going to the gym more regularly, channeling any residual anger into physical activity. My therapist said it was a good way to process negative feelings, and she was right. I felt healthier, both mentally and physically. A few months later, I ran into an old acquaintance who mentioned Carla. He said she was trying to find a job and living in a cramped situation. He added that Sasha was nowhere to be seen, apparently off with friends in another city. I just shrugged, made some polite comment, and changed the subject. Inside, I felt a sense of closure. They had wanted to keep secrets and live a double life. Now they had exactly that. No stability, no safety net, and no more free rides. I never ran into Sam, nor did I care to. As far as I knew, he stayed away once things got serious. It figured that a man willing to sleep with a married woman and let her teenage daughter help hide it wouldn't stick around to pick up the pieces. Poetic justice, in my opinion. Today, I can honestly say I have no regrets about how I handled it. I refused to let them manipulate me into forgiveness or a lenient settlement. They got what they deserved. Nothing. I gave Carla and Sasha every opportunity to live comfortably, to share a life with me built on trust. They chose deceit. Once I saw their true colors, there was no going back. If anyone reading this is facing a similar betrayal, my advice is simple. Look out for yourself. Gather evidence, protect your assets, and don't let guilt or outside pressure weaken your resolve. People will tell you to be the bigger person, to consider the history you shared, or to think about how rough the other person has it. But those are distractions from the cold, hard truth that you were wronged. You owe them nothing. I'm finally at peace. My daughter visits often, and our bond is stronger than ever. I wake up without that knot in my stomach, wondering if I'm being lied to. I go about my day with clarity, knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered most. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about self-respect. For anyone curious, Carla and Sasha remain out of my life. Last I heard, Carla was still bouncing between low-paying gigs, trying to keep her head above water. Sasha apparently blames her mother for losing a comfortable life. Neither has tried reaching out again. Good riddance. They made their bed, and now they can lie in it. That's my story. 3,000 words of betrayal, anger, and ultimately, liberation. If this helps anyone else muster the courage to protect themselves after a brutal betrayal, then at least some good came out of my nightmare. I'm moving forward, alone, but unbroken. I'm about to share a story I never thought I'd post online, but after reading similar experiences, I feel compelled to put mine out there. It's about betrayal, heartbreak, and the satisfying sting of revenge. I've always tried to be the nice guy, but sometimes that only makes you an easy target. I once believed I'd spend my life with the woman who made me laugh more than anyone else. That woman was Sarah. She had a sense of humor and a spark that drew me in from the moment we met at a friend's party. For a while, we were inseparable, and I thought I'd finally found the person I was meant to grow old with. But everything changed when I discovered she'd been cheating on me before our wedding even took place. As if that wasn't enough, she ended up using the ring I bought for her to get engaged to her ex. Then, in a cruel twist, she blamed me for every disaster in her life. I met Sarah through mutual friends, and it felt like I'd known her for ages. We connected instantly over our shared love of cheesy horror movies and late-night diner runs. We'd stay up until sunrise talking about everything and nothing. At first, I was drawn to her carefree spirit. She seemed spontaneous and full of life. We started dating, and within a few months, I bought an engagement ring because I was convinced she was the one. People said I was moving too fast, but I ignored them. I was caught up in the whirlwind of what I believed was genuine passion. Sarah said yes, and for a while, I was on cloud 9. I never suspected she was meeting up with her ex in secret. I had no idea that while I was planning our wedding, she was busy rekindling a flame that should have stayed extinguished. I found out about her infidelity in the worst way. One night, about 3 weeks before the wedding, I got a call from an unknown number. This anonymous caller asked if I knew where Sarah was. I said I assumed she was at her apartment. He laughed and told me to check her phone records. I didn't recognize his voice, and I had no idea how he got my number, but something about his tone rattled me. After hanging up, I felt uneasy enough to do some digging. I managed to get into Sarah's phone log on our shared account and saw that she'd been exchanging late-night calls with a specific number. That same number had popped up multiple times, and each call lasted well over an hour. My stomach dropped when I realized she'd been in constant contact with her ex, a guy she claimed was ancient history. I confronted Sarah that same night. At first, she tried to brush it off as harmless. She said they were just catching up, that he was going through a tough time, and she was providing emotional support. But I wasn't born yesterday. Something in her eyes told me there was more to the story. I asked her why she never mentioned these calls before. She said she knew I'd react poorly, which meant she was already hiding something. I told her I wouldn't be able to marry her unless she came clean. She broke down crying, swearing that it was only emotional, not physical. Against my better judgment, I chose to believe her. Part of me was terrified of losing the future I'd built up in my mind. Part of me hoped it was just a stupid mistake she'd never repeat. Turns out, I was way off. We went ahead with the wedding, and I tried to push my doubts aside. The ceremony was small, attended mostly by family and close friends. Everyone thought we looked happy, but I had a nagging feeling that something was amiss. She barely met my gaze, and whenever we had a quiet moment, she seemed lost in thought. Still, I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters and decided that once we were married, everything would settle. That was a joke. Within a month of our wedding, I started noticing little changes. She would stay late at work, but never had a believable explanation. She'd come home distant, moody, or sometimes weirdly euphoric. When I asked for details, I got half-truths and deflections. By the time we hit our 6-month anniversary, I finally got my hands on tangible proof that she was meeting her ex in hotel rooms. It broke me to see the evidence with my own eyes. I'd wanted so badly to believe she was just confused or struggling with the transition into marriage. I confronted her again, but this time, I didn't bother to ask for an explanation. I simply told her I wanted a divorce. She begged me to reconsider, sobbing that she loved me, that she'd made a terrible mistake. I demanded to know how long it had been going on, and she finally admitted it started before we tied the knot. She'd basically walked down the aisle while sleeping with another man. Feeling utterly betrayed, I moved out of our apartment that night. At first, I had no desire to humiliate her or get revenge. I only wanted to leave and never look back. But then, she made the next move that changed everything. A week after I moved out, she served me with separation papers full of outrageous demands. She wanted spousal support, a portion of my savings, and, to top it all off, she insisted she should keep the ring. Her justification was that she deserved it for emotional damages caused by our breakup. The audacity was mind-boggling. I tried reasoning with her, reminding her that she was the one who broke our vows. She didn't care. She was determined to squeeze as much money out of me as possible. That's when I caught wind that she was still with her ex, except now she was wearing my ring and posting pictures on social media. It felt like a giant middle finger aimed right at me. I realized at that moment that trying to be polite or civil was a waste of my time. I lawyered up. My attorney advised me to document everything. I started gathering all the evidence of her affair, including text messages, hotel receipts, and screenshots of her social media posts. The more I dug, the angrier I got. I discovered that her ex had a nasty habit of jumping from one relationship to the next whenever it suited him. He had money issues, and ironically, Sarah's plan was probably to get enough spousal support from me to keep him afloat. That realization fueled my determination to fight back. Instead of rolling over and accepting her demands, I made it clear that I'd see her in court. My lawyer helped me craft a strategy. If she wanted to be petty, I'd show her just how nasty things could get. I was done being a doormat. As the legal battle ramped up, she moved in with her ex. They flaunted their relationship all over social media, uploading pictures of them partying, dining out, and taking weekend trips. Sometimes she wore my ring in those pictures, which felt like a final twist of the knife. But I kept my cool. My lawyer told me not to engage publicly, not to post or comment on anything related to the case. Instead, we quietly compiled more evidence of her cohabitation and financial support of her new partner. This was crucial because it undermined her claim for spousal support. Meanwhile, I discovered something else. Her ex was on probation for a past fraud case, and there were rumors he was at it again. If these rumors were true, Sarah was tying herself to someone with a serious criminal track record. Things took an unexpected turn when her ex dumped her. Apparently, he got bored or found someone else. Not long after, photos of him with a different woman popped up on social media. Sarah was left alone and humiliated. She had paraded my ring around, bragged about leaving me for this amazing guy, and now he'd kicked her to the curb. That's when she turned around and started blaming me for everything. She claimed that if I had been a better husband, she wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. She told her friends and family that I was cold, unloving, and unsupportive. She painted herself as the victim of a neglectful partner. Even though most of our mutual friends knew the truth, some people fell for her sob story. It was infuriating to watch her shift the narrative so effortlessly. I was done playing the nice guy. With my lawyer's help, I filed a counterclaim that outlined all her cheating, her cohabitation with another man, and the emotional distress she'd caused me by dragging out this process. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about clearing my name and exposing her lies. I also prepared to call several witnesses, including a couple of her former friends who distanced themselves from her once they realized how manipulative she could be. Meanwhile, I kept living my life, showing up to work, saving every penny I could for the legal fees, and avoiding any direct contact with her. My anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but I channeled it into building the strongest case possible. Finally, the day came for our court hearing. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, my lawyer on one side, hers on the other. She tried to maintain an air of innocence, but the evidence we presented was overwhelming. We had phone records, text messages, and witness statements. We had photos of her and her ex flaunting themselves while she was still legally married to me. Her lawyer attempted to argue that these were private matters and had no bearing on the divorce settlement, but the judge disagreed. The judge not only denied her spousal support request, but also ordered her to return the ring. She tried to argue that it was a gift, but in our state, engagement rings are considered conditional gifts that must be returned if the marriage ends due to the receiver's fault. That was just the beginning. The court also took into account her blatant disregard for marital fidelity and her attempts to defraud me financially. She ended up losing any claim to my savings, and I was granted a swift divorce. There was a moment when she looked at me with desperation in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe this was happening. She'd expected me to lie down and let her walk all over me. She'd thought she could twist the narrative and come out on top, but the truth was finally laid bare, and the judge saw right through her manipulations. In the end, she left the courtroom empty-handed, carrying only her bruised ego. I'd like to say I felt pity for her in that moment, but I didn't. I felt relieved, vindicated, and yes, a little smug. But I wasn't finished. I'd gotten my legal victory, but she had spent months dragging my name through the mud. She'd told anyone who would listen that I was abusive or neglectful. Even after losing in court, she tried to spin the story on social media, claiming the legal system was biased, that she'd been tricked. I decided to publicly share the court documents, which were a matter of public record. I posted them online along with a concise statement of facts. I didn't rant or call her names. I simply let the evidence speak for itself. People were shocked when they saw how much she'd lied. Her remaining supporters started to back away. She lashed out at me, calling me petty, but I felt no remorse. If she wanted to play dirty, she should have expected to get dirty. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. I switched jobs, moved to a different neighborhood, and began reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my toxic marriage. The healing process was slow, but every day I felt a bit lighter. Occasionally, I'd hear rumors about Sarah. She'd lost a lot of social capital, had trouble finding a stable job, and was dealing with a string of short-lived relationships. People told me she sometimes complained that I had ruined her life. I never responded. I figured my silence was the best way to handle it. Deep down, I felt satisfied knowing she couldn't shift the blame this time. Her downfall was entirely of her own making, and everyone knew it. One day, she reached out to me directly. I received a long email from her, claiming she'd found God and wanted to make amends. She wrote that she was sorry for what she'd done, but also insisted that I had played a role in pushing her away. She hinted that I owed her a chance at reconciliation, that maybe we could start fresh now that we'd both grown. I read her words and felt no sympathy. This was the same woman who'd lied, cheated, and humiliated me. She'd tried to rob me blind and tarnish my reputation. Forgiveness was never on the table. I deleted her email without replying, and I blocked her on every platform where she might try to contact me. I was done. Over time, I started dating again. It wasn't easy letting someone new into my life, but I took it slow. I was transparent about my baggage, making sure I didn't project my old wounds onto a fresh relationship. My new partner was understanding and patient, traits I realized I needed more than fiery passion. We built something healthier and more stable than I'd ever experienced. I found myself actually enjoying the small moments, the quiet evenings, and honest conversations that never left me second-guessing. In the background, Sarah's drama continued, but it no longer mattered to me. My focus had shifted toward a future that no longer involved her at all. However, I'd be lying if I said I never thought about revenge beyond the courtroom victory. There were times I fantasized about exposing every detail of her deceit to anyone who still believed her. But in the end, I realized the best revenge was living well. She wanted to see me broken, living in misery, but I was thriving. My career was on track, my personal life was better than ever, and I had a newfound sense of self-worth. If there was one final act of vengeance, it was simply refusing to give her any more power over my emotions. Every time she tried to contact me, she ran into a dead end. Every rumor she spread was met with skepticism because I had already proven her a liar. The satisfaction I got from knowing that was immeasurable. So here I am, sharing my story for anyone who might be going through something similar. When you've been betrayed, it's natural to want closure or retribution. I won't pretend I took the moral high road at every turn. I fought tooth and nail to protect myself and expose the truth. And I don't regret it. Sometimes, you have to stand up for yourself against people who assume they can manipulate you without consequences. My ex-wife learned the hard way that actions have repercussions. If I could offer any advice, it would be this. Gather your evidence, know your legal rights, and don't let shame keep you silent. You might be surprised how much you can accomplish when you stop playing the role of the victim. I'm living proof that revenge, when executed with careful planning, can be downright liberating. Even now, years after the divorce was finalized, people occasionally ask me if I ever forgave her. The simple answer is no. I moved on, but I didn't grant her absolution. Some might say that holding on to resentment is toxic, but I don't see it that way. I transformed the anger into motivation, using it to remind myself of what I will and will not tolerate in any relationship. Whenever I recall how she betrayed me, it reinforces my resolve to be honest in my own dealings and to demand honesty from those around me. I don't wish her harm, but I also don't wish her well. She is just someone I used to know, someone who revealed the worst parts of herself long after I had already committed to a life together. In a way, her betrayal was the catalyst for my personal growth. I discovered my inner strength when I was forced to defend my dignity and finances against her selfish scheme. That journey taught me resilience and boosted my self-esteem in the long run. I share this story as a testament to the fact that no matter how bleak things look, you can come out on the other side stronger and wiser. If my experience resonates with you, let it serve as a reminder that you are not powerless. You do not have to accept blame that isn't yours, and you certainly don't have to forgive someone who has never truly earned it. It's okay to walk away with your head held high and your spine intact. For me, that was the ultimate form of revenge, showing her that she didn't break me. Instead, her betrayal became the turning point that launched me into a better life. I'm grateful for my current blessings, a supportive partner, a stable job, and the freedom to spend my days free from drama. I hope my story inspires anyone who feels trapped in a cycle of betrayal. You deserve more than apologies that don't mean anything. You deserve real respect, and if that respect isn't given, you have every right to walk away without looking back. Remember, life is too precious to waste on toxic people. I'm writing this because I'm at my wit's end, and I need to share it with someone who won't judge me, at least not to my face. 15 years ago, my wife, Amanda, decided she was done with our marriage, done with our family, and done with our daughter, Lucy. There was no big fight leading up to it, no dramatic meltdown in the living room, just a simple conversation after dinner one night. She told me she felt trapped in our life together, that she never really wanted children, and that she needed to find herself. The next morning, she was gone, leaving behind only a crumpled note saying she would write once she figured out where her life was going. At that time, Lucy was barely 3 years old. I spent the first few weeks in a daze, numb to everything. Every time Lucy asked where her mommy was, my heart broke a little more. Amanda stayed true to her word about writing. She sent one letter about a month after she left, describing her new job in California and how she was sure it was the right decision for her personal growth. She never once asked how Lucy was doing. She never once apologized for walking out so abruptly. After that, there was silence. Raising Lucy alone forced me to become a better person. I won't pretend I didn't stumble. I had nights where I felt completely overwhelmed, nights where I'd stand outside her bedroom door, just listening to her breathe, wondering if I'd ever fill the void her mother left behind. But every morning, I woke up determined to give Lucy the best life possible. Over the years, I found a better job in a tech support department, worked long hours, and eventually moved up the ladder enough to provide a stable income. We managed to have a comfortable, if not glamorous, life. Lucy grew into a remarkable young woman. She's smart, kind, responsible, and more empathetic than anyone I know. She writes her own music, plays the guitar, and volunteers at a local animal shelter. She's sometimes asked about her mother, but over time, those questions turned into quiet acceptance. She knew Amanda wasn't coming back anytime soon, and she seemed to make peace with it. So when Amanda suddenly showed up on our doorstep last month, Lucy was caught off guard, and so was I. She looked almost the same, just older, with a streak of gray in her hair and faint wrinkles around her eyes. But the confident, almost smug expression on her face set me on edge immediately. She introduced the man standing behind her as Ryan, her boyfriend. Lucy came to the door when she heard voices, and the look on her face was a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something like anger. Amanda acted as if they were long-lost best friends, stepping forward to hug her, but Lucy took a step back, crossing her arms. I asked them what they wanted, and Amanda casually said, "We're here to see our daughter, of course." The nerve of it almost made me laugh. After all those years of no contact, of ignoring birthdays, holidays, milestones, she saunters in and calls Lucy our daughter. I kept my composure, told her we weren't interested in whatever she had to say, but she insisted on coming inside. Against my better judgment, I let them into the living room, mostly because Lucy seemed frozen, and I didn't want to make a scene in front of the neighbors. Amanda acted like she was returning to a home she never really knew. She glanced around, probably judging the furniture, the decor, everything I had worked hard for. Lucy sat on the edge of the sofa, arms still crossed, while Amanda started rambling about how she had spent the last few years living in Europe, dabbling in painting, traveling with Ryan. She claimed she had an epiphany, realized that family was important, and she wanted to reconnect. I waited for her to address the elephant in the room, that she'd abandoned her child for 15 years. When she finally got around to it, she brushed it off like a youthful indiscretion. "I was young and confused," she said. "I needed to discover who I really was." Lucy looked at her and quietly said, "You never tried to call me or send me a letter or anything?" Amanda sighed like this was some minor oversight. Ryan jumped in, claiming that Lucy should be more understanding of the challenges Amanda faced. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told them to leave, reminding Amanda that she forfeited her parental rights a long time ago. She then dropped the bombshell. She was seeking joint custody. She even had the audacity to say she wanted Lucy to spend summers with her and Ryan, maybe even move in with them full-time. My first instinct was to laugh again, but the look in Amanda's eyes told me she was serious. She pulled out a folder from her bag, which contained documents she claimed were proof of her stable income, her nice house, and her ability to provide for Lucy. I calmly told her that Lucy was almost 18, and that there was no way a judge would uproot her life now to accommodate someone who walked away years ago. Amanda shrugged and said she had connections in the legal system. Ryan chimed in with some smug comment about how money can move mountains. After that meeting, I consulted a lawyer. Lucy was furious, feeling betrayed by a mother who seemed more interested in winning some twisted game than in actually getting to know her. I tried to reassure her that everything would be all right, but I wasn't entirely sure myself. Amanda had disappeared with no forwarding address for all these years, so I never bothered with a formal custody battle. My lawyer said that, legally, Amanda could try to re-enter Lucy's life, but Lucy's age would likely give her a say in the matter. Still, I felt uneasy. Over the following weeks, Amanda and Ryan kept showing up, trying to talk to Lucy at school, sending her messages on social media. Lucy blocked them, but they found new ways to reach out. They started filming themselves outside our house, likely hoping to catch me losing my temper on camera. I almost fell for it once, but Lucy grabbed my arm and told me not to give them ammunition. So I took the high road. I documented everything, kept copies of every text, every voicemail, every unwelcome visit. My lawyer assured me it would help our case. Then, I discovered something that changed the game. Amanda hadn't just been living a carefree life. She had been involved in some questionable business dealings with Ryan. A friend of mine who works in finance recognized Ryan from a news segment about a real estate scam. Ryan had been accused of swindling multiple investors, though he managed to avoid charges by paying people off. My friend hinted there were rumors Ryan was still up to no good, but had a knack for covering his tracks. The fact that Amanda was connected to him made my blood boil. That's when the idea of revenge started to form in my mind. I had no desire to reconcile with Amanda, and I sure as hell wasn't about to forgive her. But I needed a plan that would ensure she couldn't hurt Lucy, a plan that would bury her custody claim and expose Ryan for the fraud he was. I spent nights combing through financial records I could get my hands on, scanning local court filings, searching for any mention of Ryan's name. I found a pattern of shell companies linked to addresses in different states. It was complicated, but I knew there was something there. Meanwhile, Amanda actually filed a motion for custody. I was served the papers at work, which humiliated me in front of my colleagues. My lawyer said we had a strong case because Amanda had abandoned Lucy, but we couldn't ignore the possibility that Amanda's new wealth and connections might sway a judge. Lucy was old enough to speak her mind in court, but that didn't guarantee anything. Stress weighed on both of us. Lucy started having trouble sleeping. I tried to reassure her, but I felt powerless and angry. Then, I got my first big break. Ryan's name popped up in a civil suit in another state. One of his old associates was suing him for breach of contract, alleging that Ryan had siphoned funds from a joint venture. I managed to get the court documents. They were loaded with details about how Ryan created fake invoices and phantom employees to funnel money into private accounts. If I could prove he was still doing that stuff, it might ruin him and discredit Amanda. But I needed more evidence. I hired a private investigator with the little savings I had. The man was semi-retired but knew his way around financial forensics. I gave him every scrap of information I had on Ryan and Amanda, including possible business addresses they used. He took a week and got back to me with a suspicious paper trail linking Ryan to multiple businesses in our county. Some of them were real estate holding companies, some were import-export shells. All had ties to a single-parent corporation run by Amanda's European art dealer friend. My investigator said it looked like money laundering. I couldn't believe Amanda was tangled up in this. Then again, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. She always had expensive tastes and a reckless streak. I handed everything over to my lawyer, who was stunned but advised me to be careful. We couldn't just accuse them of illegal activity in court without solid proof, but we could keep it in our back pocket as leverage. The goal was to protect Lucy, not necessarily to orchestrate a huge takedown. Still, I had other ideas. Lucy was becoming more stressed as the custody hearing drew closer. Amanda began posting pictures online of Lucy as a toddler, painting herself as a loving mother who was just trying to make amends. People unfamiliar with the real story started commenting, calling Lucy ungrateful for not giving Amanda a second chance. Lucy cried more nights than I could count. She was furious, embarrassed, and hurt. I grew more determined to strike back. If Amanda wanted a war, I was prepared to fight. I found a sympathetic reporter at a local newspaper, someone who had covered small-scale corruption cases before. I tipped him off about Ryan's suspicious real estate dealings and the possibility that he and Amanda were laundering money. I provided some of the documents I had, keeping my name out of it. The reporter was intrigued, but needed more solid evidence to run the story. I promised I'd get him what he needed. The custody hearing arrived. We sat in a small courtroom, Lucy by my side, Amanda and Ryan on the other. Amanda's lawyer tried to paint me as a man who kept Lucy away from her rightful mother. He talked about Amanda's reformed life, her financial stability, and her ability to give Lucy a better future. But Lucy spoke up, bravely telling the judge that Amanda was a complete stranger to her. She described the harassment, the manipulation, and how it was affecting her mental health. The judge listened intently. Then it was my turn to testify. My lawyer presented evidence that Amanda left abruptly and never tried to maintain contact. We showed years of medical bills and school records that I covered on my own. Amanda looked irritated, but Ryan smirked as if he found this entire proceeding amusing. I hated him in that moment. Amanda's lawyer made a last-ditch claim that I was unstable, but the judge seemed unconvinced. The judge didn't make a final ruling that day, but stated he wanted an evaluation of Lucy's living situation. A social worker was assigned to interview us and inspect the home. Amanda flashed a confident smile, as though she expected the system to swing in her favor. Lucy squeezed my hand, and we left the courthouse in silence. We had more waiting ahead. I decided to accelerate my plan. Through my investigator, I found one of Ryan's former employees who was bitter about unpaid wages. This person provided me with internal emails and spreadsheets that detailed how Ryan moved money around. It was the smoking gun I needed. I passed it on to the reporter, who promised a story would run in a week, maybe two, depending on editorial clearance. During that waiting period, Amanda and Ryan showed up again at my house. This time, they brought flowers and a teddy bear for Lucy, probably trying to appear nurturing in case the social worker was watching. Lucy refused to answer the door. I told them to leave or I'd call the police. Ryan smirked again, whispering something in Amanda's ear as they walked away. I felt a surge of anger. I was done playing nice. The social worker visit went smoothly. Lucy's room was organized, our kitchen well-stocked, and the place was clean. I explained our daily routine, how Lucy was performing in school, and the social worker seemed satisfied that Lucy was well cared for. I mentioned how Amanda's sudden reappearance had destabilized everything, and the social worker took notes. They said they'd be conducting their own interviews and would submit a report to the court. It was out of my hands now. A week later, the newspaper article dropped. The headline implicated Ryan in a major financial fraud scheme, complete with details about offshore accounts and fake employees. Amanda's name appeared in the piece, though it was unclear how deeply she was involved. The story spread quickly online. Ryan went dark on social media. Amanda's new posts vanished, replaced by silence. Lucy read the article with wide eyes, realizing her mother was part of something big. A few days later, Ryan was arrested. It turned out the feds had been looking into him for months, and the article spurred them into faster action. Amanda tried to distance herself from him, but rumors circulated that she might be under investigation too. The custody case was still open, but Amanda's credibility took a massive hit. During the next court date, Amanda's lawyer tried to sidestep the scandal, claiming it had no bearing on her fitness as a mother. But the judge wasn't having it. He asked Amanda directly if she had knowledge of Ryan's illegal activities. She stammered through a denial, but it sounded rehearsed. The social worker's report was also in. It concluded that Lucy was thriving under my care and expressed concerns about the disruption Amanda's sudden return caused. The judge ruled that Amanda's petition for joint custody was denied. He stated that, given Lucy's age, her wishes were paramount, and the mother's disappearance for 15 years weighed heavily against her. I saw Amanda's face twist with rage. She shot me a venomous glare, as though I had personally orchestrated this humiliation. In a way, I had, but she deserved it. After court, Lucy and I went out for a quiet dinner, just the two of us. She seemed relieved, but also sad. I don't know if I should feel happy, she admitted. She's still my mom, but she hurt me so much. I told her she had every right to be upset, that it would take time to process everything. We tried to have a normal meal, but my mind kept drifting to the next phase of my plan. I had no intention of letting Amanda off the hook now that custody was settled. She had tried to undermine me, torment Lucy, and barge back into our lives like we owed her something. The reporter told me the authorities were building a case against Ryan, and Amanda might be implicated. If she was guilty, I wanted her to face the consequences. I made sure the investigator stayed on retainer to pass along any further leads. A month later, I got word that Amanda had been questioned by federal agents. Apparently, Ryan was cutting a plea deal, and he might implicate Amanda in exchange for leniency. Lucy asked me if I would ever consider talking things out with Amanda, maybe letting her apologize. I didn't want Lucy to see how deep my bitterness ran, so I just told her Amanda had made her own bed. If Lucy wanted to keep her distance, I'd support that. One evening, Amanda showed up alone at our house, looking disheveled and frantic. She practically begged me to let her in. Lucy was out with friends, so I opened the door, but not wide enough for her to step inside. She said Ryan had turned on her, that she was going to be indicted if she couldn't prove her innocence. She claimed she had nowhere else to go. I looked at this woman who had caused so much turmoil and felt nothing but coldness. She asked if I would testify that she was a good mother who just made mistakes, so it would look better for her in court. I nearly laughed in her face. Instead, I told her I wanted nothing to do with her legal mess. She tried to guilt-trip me, bringing up our past, saying she was my wife once. I reminded her she walked out on that marriage. She started crying, but I felt no sympathy. Amanda insisted that Lucy deserved to see her mother free and not behind bars. She begged me to give her just a little help. I told her Lucy deserved better than a criminal mother who crawled back only when she needed something. She called me cruel. I told her cruelty was abandoning a child for 15 years and then trying to snatch custody. I asked her to leave and never come back. Amanda glared at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, then stormed off. That was the last time I saw her in person. A few weeks later, I heard she got charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Lucy found out through social media, and she didn't say much, just that she felt numb. I told her it was okay to feel however she did. Time passed. Lucy graduated high school and started community college nearby. We settled back into our life, the two of us supporting each other. Occasionally, I heard updates about Amanda's case. Ryan turned state's evidence against her, so she took a plea deal. She got a reduced sentence, but still spent time behind bars. Lucy never visited her. She never asked if I would take her. I think she realized that chapter of her life was closed. I wish I could say the revenge made me feel triumphant, but it was more of a grim satisfaction. I protected my daughter, made sure Amanda couldn't hurt her anymore. Maybe part of me still felt the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being left behind. But I never forgave her. She didn't deserve forgiveness. She chose her path. Lucy and I talk sometimes about the future, about the possibility of Amanda trying to contact us again. I told her she can make her own decisions about that when she feels ready. I won't stand in her way if she wants to hear Amanda out someday, but she doesn't seem to want that right now. In truth, neither do I. Even though this story might sound like a soap opera, it happened to me, to us, in the most real way possible. I lost sleep, lost my appetite, felt my heart race every time I saw a black SUV parked on our street. I worried about Lucy's emotional well-being every day. But we made it through, and for now, life is calmer. Amanda is gone, and she won't be back anytime soon. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I reflect on how different our lives could have been if Amanda had chosen to stay. Would Lucy be a different person? Would I have chased different dreams? I guess there's no point in dwelling on that. She made her choice back then, and she made her choices now. All I can do is focus on what Lucy needs and keep moving forward. If Amanda ever reads this, I hope she knows I'm not sorry for what I did. She came at us like we were pawns in her new game, expecting Lucy to fall into her arms and me to stand aside quietly. She should have known better. If she had even a fraction of maternal instinct, she would have realized the damage she did. And she would have understood that some betrayals can't be forgiven. In the end, the best revenge was stopping her cold. She lost her freedom, her credibility, and any chance of ever dragging Lucy into her chaos. I still remember the day my parents told me to gather my belongings and wait outside. I was 14, and I'd just come home from school, expecting the usual routine of microwaved leftovers and half-hearted small talk. Instead, I found my mother standing by the couch, arms crossed, and my father pacing back and forth. They said they'd made a difficult decision for the good of the family. What that meant, I had no clue, but the tension in their voices made me uneasy. I was told I'd be living with my Uncle Bill for a while, that it was temporary. They offered no explanation beyond that. At first, I assumed it was a short stay, maybe a week or two, but when Uncle Bill pulled up in his old sedan, I noticed the trunk was open and my mother handed me a large duffel bag already packed with most of my clothes. There were no hugs, just curt instructions to get in and be grateful Bill was willing to take me in. My father avoided eye contact as he helped load my things. The entire exchange took less than 10 minutes. The door slammed behind them, and suddenly, I was in my uncle's car, watching our apartment building fade into the distance. It felt surreal, like I'd been plucked out of my life and tossed somewhere else without so much as a goodbye. Uncle Bill wasn't much of a talker, but he did his best to console me. Once we got to his house, a modest one-story in an older neighborhood, he showed me the small guest room that would become my bedroom. His expression was pained, like he hated the circumstances that brought me there. Still, he never badmouthed my parents. He said they felt they couldn't handle raising a teenager anymore, that they'd given up for reasons he didn't fully understand. He apologized on their behalf more than once, which only confused me further. If they loved me, why let me go so easily? I tried calling them several times in the days that followed, only to be met with silence. They had effectively disappeared from my life, blocking my number and leaving me in the care of an uncle who, until then, had mostly been a stranger. Despite the shock, I made an effort to settle in. Uncle Bill worked as a self-employed electrician, and he spent long hours on jobs around town. He wasn't married and had no kids of his own, so my presence in his home was new territory for both of us. Yet he never treated me like a burden. He helped me transfer schools, pay for books, and even encouraged me to join some after-school clubs. Over time, we developed a routine. He'd pack me a lunch in the morning before heading to a job site, and I'd come home to a friendly note on the counter letting me know when he'd return. In those early months, I was still waiting for my parents to realize they'd made a huge mistake. I assumed, naively, that they would come to their senses, show up, and apologize. That never happened. As I adjusted to life with Uncle Bill, I discovered I had more freedom and more responsibility than ever before. Bill made it clear he wasn't interested in being a strict parent, but he had expectations. Keep my grades up, contribute to chores, and be honest about my whereabouts. It was a refreshing change from living with parents who either micromanaged or ignored me depending on their mood. I started to see Uncle Bill as someone who genuinely cared, even if he wasn't outwardly sentimental. He was the kind of person who showed love through actions, not just words, and that resonated with me. One day, about a year into living there, I stumbled upon a stack of unopened letters in the kitchen drawer. They were all addressed to my parents, and from the return addresses, I recognized some as bills and others as official notices. My uncle confessed that my father had forwarded his mail to Bill's address without a heads up. He shrugged and said it wasn't a big deal, but something about that felt off. It was as though my parents couldn't be bothered to handle their own responsibilities. I asked if they'd ever inquired about me, and Uncle Bill hesitated before saying no. That was when it really sank in. My parents had severed ties completely. They'd moved, changed phone numbers, and left no forwarding information for me. I was, for all intents and purposes, out of their lives. Anger set in, followed by a deep sadness. Yet Uncle Bill was there every step of the way. He taught me how to fix basic electrical issues, how to replace a toilet valve, and even how to cook a halfway decent steak. I thrived under his laid-back mentorship. My grades improved, and I found a new passion for computers, something Bill encouraged wholeheartedly. He would drive me to the local library every weekend so I could use their internet to learn about coding and hardware. Before long, I was fixing old laptops and selling them online for pocket money. Bill noticed how excited I got whenever I completed a successful transaction, and he urged me to think about ways to turn that into a real career. When high school ended, the question of college came up. I had decent grades, but no savings and no parental support. Bill offered to help pay for community college, emphasizing the importance of education. He also encouraged me to keep pursuing the side hustle of repairing and flipping used electronics. The first 2 years of college were a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and late nights spent tinkering with secondhand computers. If I ever felt overwhelmed, Bill would remind me how far I'd come, that I was capable of more than I realized. He never gave me a pep talk about my parents. It was as though he knew that topic was a raw nerve. Instead, he channeled all his energy into guiding me, hoping I'd see that I was worth caring for, worth investing in. In that sense, he was more of a father than my biological one had ever been. During my sophomore year of community college, I took a risk. I used my savings to rent a small booth at a weekend tech market, where local enthusiasts gathered to buy, sell, and trade gadgets. Business was slow at first, but word spread about my knack for repairing devices that most people would have junked. Gradually, I built a reputation and earned a modest profit. Uncle Bill would stop by on Sundays to bring me lunch, looking proud as he surveyed the rows of laptops and phones I'd refurbished. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start, and I felt a growing sense of independence. Around that time, I bumped into a distant cousin who had more recent information about my parents. According to him, they'd moved to another state for a fresh start. The rumor was that they had racked up debt and burned bridges, which made them want to relocate and rebuild. There was no mention of me, no indication that they cared about what happened after they sent me off. It stung, but it also fueled my resolve. I decided I would succeed without them, not just to prove a point, but to validate the support Uncle Bill had shown me. If my parents thought I was disposable, I'd show them how wrong they were. When I finally earned my associate's degree, I opted to skip transferring to a university. Instead, I doubled down on my small electronics business, securing a tiny storefront in a rundown strip mall. The rent was cheap and the walls were barely holding together, but it was my first official step into entrepreneurship. Uncle Bill and I spent 2 weeks renovating the space, patching holes and painting walls. When I opened the doors, the initial foot traffic was minimal. I passed out flyers and relied on word of mouth. Eventually, a few customers trickled in and I worked around the clock to make sure they left happy. Slowly, my reputation grew. Uncle Bill was a steady presence throughout this journey, offering the kind of emotional and financial support I never got from my parents. He didn't bankroll me, but he always had my back. If I needed to borrow his truck to pick up supplies or help moving furniture, he was there. And if I felt insecure about my abilities, he reminded me of how much I'd accomplished already. He even introduced me to some of his electrician buddies, who occasionally hired me to set up computer systems for their clients. Through those connections, I picked up corporate gigs, fixing office networks and configuring databases. The variety of work expanded my skill set and helped me turn a modest profit. That money went right back into the business. Even then, part of me wondered if my parents would ever surface again. I suspected they'd show up the moment they heard I was doing well, and I dreaded the day I might have to face them. But for a long stretch of time, they remained silent, and I focused on building my life the way I wanted. By the time I was 23, My modest storefront was turning a decent profit, enough that I could move out of Uncle Bill's place and rent a small apartment nearby. I'd grown used to living with him, but I felt it was time to test my independence. Even after I moved, we stayed close, having dinner together and discussing new ideas for the business. One afternoon, he mentioned the possibility of buying a building outright. He believed in real estate as a form of security, and he thought if I owned my workspace, I could save on rent and possibly expand. The idea appealed to me, but the numbers seemed too daunting. Uncle Bill simply told me, "We'll figure it out. Don't underestimate yourself." We spent months hunting for the right property, eventually finding a rundown two-story with a small storefront on the ground floor and a living space above. It needed major renovations, but we saw potential. With Bill as my co-signer, I secured a loan, and we closed the deal. Renovations took nearly a year of weekends, late nights, and more money than I initially planned. We worked side by side, tearing down drywall, installing new wiring, and making the place livable. When it was done, I moved in upstairs, and my business occupied the newly remodeled shop below. That was when I first felt a tangible sense of stability, a real place of my own. Shortly after I reopened in the new location, I got a message on social media from a name that made my stomach churn. My father. It was short, just a couple of lines saying he hoped I was doing well and that he and my mother would like to talk. No apology, no acknowledgement of the years of silence. I froze, uncertain how to respond. Memories of that day they shipped me off came flooding back. Anger roiled in my gut. After everything, they suddenly wanted to talk? I left the message unanswered for a week. Finally, I showed it to Uncle Bill, who just said, "Do whatever feels right. You don't owe them anything." I decided to block him and move on. But that was just the beginning. A few weeks later, my mother emailed me a rambling apology that ended with a request for money. She claimed they'd lost their jobs and needed help to cover rent. The email read more like a sales pitch than a genuine attempt to reconnect. I didn't reply. I stewed in anger, half expecting them to show up at my doorstep unannounced. I told Bill I wanted revenge, but I wasn't sure how to get it without stooping to their level. He told me I didn't need to do anything drastic because living well was already the best payback. I took his words to heart, focusing on my grand opening celebration for the new shop and ignoring every message from my parents. Eventually, they stopped emailing for a while, probably sensing I wouldn't budge. I poured everything into making my business a local staple, offering competitive rates and honest service. The grand opening went better than I ever imagined. Local media covered my story. A young entrepreneur who had worked his way up from selling refurbished laptops to opening a brick-and-mortar tech repair shop. Uncle Bill teased me about being a minor celebrity, but I knew the real star was the support he'd given me. We celebrated over pizza in the tiny break room behind the store. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness that my parents weren't there to see it, even though I also knew they hadn't earned an invite. A few months later, my father made an unexpected appearance in person. He strolled into my shop as if nothing had happened, wearing a forced smile and carrying a shopping bag. I recognized him right away, though he looked older, thinner. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to remain calm. He greeted me like a long-lost friend, ignoring the tension in the air. It was surreal. After a moment of awkward small talk, he admitted he needed financial help. He tried to spin a story about bad investments and how he and my mother were in dire straits. I asked him point blank why they'd cut me off. He offered a vague explanation about stress and not knowing how to handle a teenager. No real apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just a shallow plea for money. I stared at him, feeling a decade's worth of anger and resentment building in my chest. I told him I owed him nothing, that he'd forfeited any right to call himself my father the day he sent me to Bill's doorstep. He tried to but I ushered him out, telling him never to set foot in my shop again. My employees looked shocked, but I felt only relief once he was gone. Uncle Bill heard about the incident and asked me how I felt. I said I felt oddly empowered, but still furious. He suggested I let it go, that I focus on the positive aspects of my life. I tried, but my parents kept finding new ways to contact me. My mother sent letters full of sob stories about mounting debts and how they'd always loved me despite making mistakes. They begged me for a loan, promising to pay it back eventually. The hypocrisy was overwhelming. I drafted several scathing responses but never sent them. Instead, I discussed the situation with a lawyer friend who volunteered at our local business association. She advised me on how to handle potential harassment and told me that if my parents continued, I could send a cease and desist letter. It was a drastic measure, but the thought of legally shoving them out of my life was tempting. Then came the day I decided to serve my revenge cold. I arranged a meeting in a public cafe, inviting both of my parents through a single email address they had been using. I didn't tell Uncle Bill right away, partly because I wasn't sure how he'd react. I was determined to finally confront them, to stand up for myself, and to let them know exactly how they'd failed me. They arrived at the cafe, looking disheveled and uncomfortable. My father tried to hug me, but I stepped back. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off, telling them I wanted to get straight to the point. I laid out everything I'd felt since the day they put me in Uncle Bill's car. I reminded them how they never reached out during my high school years, never visited me at Bill's house, and how they blocked my calls when I needed them most. I brought up my college graduation, which they hadn't even bothered to ask about, and the fact that they hadn't offered a single cent to help me get started in life. The entire time, they sat there, eyes darting around like they wanted to escape. When I finally paused, my father cleared his throat and tried to spin the same story about financial hardship and stress. He said they assumed Uncle Bill would be a better caretaker and that they did it out of love. That was the last straw. I laughed, a bitter sound even to my own ears. I told them love isn't sending your child away without explanation. Love isn't changing your number and disappearing for years. I demanded they stop pretending it was anything but selfishness and cowardice. My mother started crying, saying she was sorry, but the tears seemed more driven by desperation than genuine remorse. Then I got to the real reason I'd asked them to meet me. I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag, a contract I'd drafted with the lawyer friend's help. It stated that if they wanted any money from me, they would have to sign over any claim to my future earnings, inheritance rights, and even the right to contact me again after a certain date. The terms were severe, practically guaranteeing I'd never have to deal with them again. I looked them in the eye and told them this was their help. They could take it or leave it. If they truly needed a loan, I'd give them a small sum, but the interest rate and conditions would be exorbitant. My father's face turned red. He asked if I was really that vindictive, if this was how I treated my own flesh and blood. I replied that blood had nothing to do with it. They made their choice years ago, and now I was making mine. They refused to sign, calling me cruel, saying I was twisting the knife. I told them that was rich coming from the people who hadn't cared whether I slept under a bridge or in a warm bed for most of my teenage years. My mother sobbed, my father spat angry words, and I sat there, unflinching. Eventually, they stormed out, calling me ungrateful and heartless. I took a moment to steady my breathing. Then I left too, feeling more satisfied than I ever had. This was my revenge, letting them see who I'd become, knowing they had no part in it, and offering them a deal so one-sided they'd never dare accept it. I told Uncle Bill about the meeting later that day, expecting him to scold me for being too harsh. Instead, he sighed and said he understood. He'd seen firsthand how they neglected me and how that shaped my life. He reiterated that the best revenge was living well, but he also admitted that sometimes you have to draw a firm boundary, one that shows people the consequences of their actions. From that point on, I felt freer. I had no illusions that my parents would leave me alone forever, but I knew I had taken control of the narrative. They'd never again catch me off guard with tears or guilt trips. In the years that followed, my business expanded. I hired a small team, opened a second location in the next town over, and even started selling my own custom-built computers. I also managed to buy Uncle Bill a small property of his own, a token of gratitude for everything he'd done. Watching him light up as I handed him the keys to his new place was priceless. That was the day I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I thought back to that 14-year-old kid who sat in Bill's car, terrified and confused. He'd come a long way. Then came the day I confronted my father for the final time. He showed up at my main store, looking ragged and desperate, claiming my mother had left him and he needed help. I stared him down, reminded him that he was the one who'd failed as a father, and told him to walk away. No forgiveness, no leniency. If he needed shelter, he could look elsewhere. because he had no place in my life. The look in his eyes told me he finally understood the depth of his mistakes. And that, in the end, was all the closure I needed. He slunk out, and I haven't heard from him since. Today, I still own that renovated building, living upstairs and running my business downstairs. I've got employees who rely on me, a community that supports me, and an uncle who stands by my side. My parents remain a distant memory, occasionally surfacing in stories I tell about my past, but never a source of pain anymore. I don't forgive them, and I don't regret that decision. They made their choice, and I made mine. The success I've built stands as proof that I never needed them, and that sometimes the best revenge is to flourish in the life they threw away. There's a sense of poetic justice in that, a lasting reminder that betrayal doesn't have to break you. Sometimes it can even make you stronger. I'm writing this under an anonymous throwaway account because I don't want any real-life connections stumbling upon my story. It's not that I'm ashamed, but I've been lurking on Reddit for years, and I know how quickly stories can go viral. Let me get straight to the point. My younger sister Clara stole our late mom's jewelry, pieces that held immense sentimental and financial value, and sold them for $10,000. Then she turned around and gave that money to our 80-year-old grandmother as some sort of flashy gift, presumably to prove she's the generous granddaughter who cares. Meanwhile, I've spent most of my adult life looking after Grandma, funding everything from her medical bills to her daily groceries, never once expecting a medal or even a thank you from Clara. I'll start with a bit of context about my family. My mother passed away 2 years ago. She left behind a small house, some personal belongings, and that box of jewelry she'd inherited from her own mother, our grandmother. It wasn't an enormous fortune, but several of the pieces were heirlooms from multiple generations. Mom had made it clear that the jewelry was to be split evenly between Clara and me. She also specified that if we ever wanted to sell anything, we should do it together, so we'd both benefit equally. That was Mom's final wish, and she trusted us to honor it. After the funeral, I thought it best to store the jewelry in a safe deposit box at the bank, especially since Clara was already making statements like, "We should cash this out now." I convinced her it would be safer and more respectful to wait at least a year. She agreed. At least, that's what she told me. I should have known better than to trust her completely, because Clara's track record with money is abysmal. Over the last decade, she's racked up credit card debt and borrowed money from family members without ever repaying them. She's even asked me for rent when she couldn't keep a stable job. I've bailed her out multiple times. Still, I worried. When the year mark rolled around, I mentioned to Clara that we should finally sit down and decide which pieces we'd keep as heirlooms and which ones we might consider selling. She looked uncomfortable and mumbled something about wanting to wait a bit longer. I didn't push it because I'd just come out of a stressful work project, and honestly, jewelry was the last thing on my mind. I figured I'd give her a couple more months to process everything. Mom's death was hard on both of us, and although we grieved in very different ways, I wanted to be patient. If I'd known then what I know now, I'd have stormed into that bank vault and checked every single piece without delay. Instead, I continued with my routine, working, visiting Grandma, making sure her bills were paid, and dropping off groceries whenever I could. My grandmother is old, but she's sharp. She knows how to stretch a dollar, and she hates fussing over material things. The only person who visits her besides me is Clara, though my sister mostly shows up to flaunt her new purchases or to guilt Grandma into praising her life choices. Then she leaves before any real conversation can happen. One day, I got a call from my aunt who lives out of state. She said Grandma had called her in tears, talking about how Clara had given her a massive gift of $10,000. Grandma was confused and kept insisting she couldn't accept such generosity. My aunt wanted to know if I'd heard anything about this. I was floored. Clara had never held down a job that would pay her enough to save 10 grand. She was perpetually broke. I assured my aunt I'd look into it. Right after that call, I texted Clara asking if we could talk. She didn't reply for 2 days. When she finally did, she acted casual and suggested we meet at Grandma's place. I drove over the next afternoon, expecting some sort of explanation. Instead, I walked in to find Clara telling Grandma that she wanted nothing. In return for her gift, just love and gratitude. Grandma seemed overwhelmed, stammering about how she couldn't possibly accept that much money from her granddaughter. I waited until Clara finished her theatrical speech, then I asked, "So, where did you get $10,000? Clara glared at me. She tried to laugh it off and said she came into some money recently, but wouldn't elaborate. Meanwhile, Grandma kept insisting she'd give the money back. I stepped into the kitchen with Clara and demanded a real explanation. That's when she admitted, a bit too casually, that she'd sold some of Mom's jewelry. My heart hammered in my chest. I asked how much she sold and why she'd done it without telling me. She shrugged and said she needed quick cash. Then she claimed she'd sold only a fraction of the collection. I was livid. I reminded her of Mom's explicit instructions. She rolled her eyes and said, "Mom's dead and she doesn't need the jewelry. Why should it sit in a box when we could use the money?" I felt sick to my stomach. I told her she had no right to sell anything without my consent. She shot back that since it was half hers, she could do what she wanted with her share. I couldn't believe how cold she was. Furious, I left the house, telling Grandma I'd be back later. I drove straight to the bank, opened the safe deposit box, and counted every piece. Multiple necklaces, rings, and a gold bracelet were missing. Not just one or two items, but a huge portion of what Mom left behind. I called Clara repeatedly. She wouldn't pick up. Over the next few days, she dodged my calls and only sent a few texts saying she was too stressed to deal with this. I contacted the jewelry store she mentioned in passing once, hoping to find out if they'd bought items from her. They confirmed they'd purchased a gold bracelet and 2 rings from someone matching Clara's description, but refused to give more info without legal paperwork. I was furious, but fury alone wasn't enough. I needed a plan. My biggest concern was the rest of the jewelry. Had she sold even more somewhere else? I couldn't risk her cleaning out everything before I could stop her, so I moved the jewelry to a different safe deposit box at another bank, one where Clara had zero access. Then I hired a lawyer. I was done with the back and forth. Mom's estate wasn't massive, but it was enough that legal counsel felt justified. I explained the situation, provided the will, and asked what my options were. The lawyer told me that since the will explicitly stated how the jewelry should be handled, and Clara had violated that, I might have grounds for legal action. But lawsuits are messy and expensive. Also, there's the possibility a court might rule that Clara only owed me half of the sale's value, since technically half the jewelry was hers. The lawyer advised me to gather as much evidence as possible before making any moves. I was seething, but I needed a clearer plan for revenge. Simply suing Clara might lead nowhere, or worse, it could drag on and cost me a fortune in legal fees. And if I did win, I'd likely end up with a judgment that Clara couldn't pay. She was already in debt. She had no real assets. I'd be left with nothing but legal bills. So I decided to approach this differently. Over the years, I'd shouldered all of Grandma's expenses without complaint. Clara never contributed a dime. She swooped in with flashy gestures, like this so-called $10,000 gift, to look good in Grandma's eyes. But day to day, I'm the one who keeps Grandma's life running smoothly. And Clara pretended she was the hero. That stung, but I also recognized an opportunity. Grandma didn't want Clara's money. She kept insisting she would give it back. That's when I realized I could turn Clara's fake generosity into her downfall. I encouraged Grandma to keep the money for now, saying it might be useful for her medical costs. Secretly, I planned to expose Clara for who she really was. First, I contacted that jewelry store again and asked if they'd be willing to let me see any receipts matching the dates I suspected. They refused outright. I didn't have a subpoena, and they wouldn't budge without one. Next, I tried another angle. Clara is notoriously careless with her digital footprint. I knew she kept online banking apps on her phone and rarely bothered with strong passwords. I wouldn't stoop to hacking her, but I did recall that she'd once used my laptop and forgot to log out of her email. Unfortunately, I'd long since logged her out, so that was a dead end. But I did know that Clara loved to brag on social media. I decided to quietly watch her profiles for any mention of new purchases or suspicious spending. Sure enough, a week later, she posted about buying a designer handbag and going on a spa day. Comments rolled in congratulating her on her sudden financial luck. She played it coy, saying she'd come into some cash, but didn't specify how. It was infuriating. Meanwhile, Grandma kept asking me if she should really keep the $10,000. I told her to hold on to it for now. She agreed, albeit reluctantly. Clara made a big show of telling everyone what a huge sacrifice she'd made and how she was just so happy to help Grandma out. I could barely stand it. Finally, after waiting a couple weeks, I decided to set the trap. I invited Clara to meet me at my apartment, telling her we needed to discuss the rest of Mom's belongings. She showed up, acting irritated, like she was doing me a favor by coming over. I told her straight up that I wanted to finalize our share of the jewelry, and that if she planned to sell anything else, it had to be done through me and split fairly. She scoffed and said she didn't need my permission, but I calmly reminded her of Mom's will. Then I informed her I'd moved the remaining pieces to a more secure location. She went pale. That's when it clicked. She must have been planning to steal more. I added that I'd hired a lawyer and was prepared to press charges if any more items went missing. She exploded, calling me a control freak and saying Mom would have wanted her to have that money to live a better life. I let her rant, and once she calmed down, I quietly said, "You sold a good chunk of the jewelry already, and I'd be well within my rights to take legal action. But I won't on one condition: you confess everything to Grandma and return the $10,000 you gave her." Clara looked stunned. She said, "But that was her gift. I can't just take it back." I replied, "Well, you shouldn't have stolen the jewelry in the first place. If you want to avoid a court case, you'll do exactly as I say." She stormed out, yelling that she'd never bow to my bullying. I let her leave, expecting she'd cool down and realize she was cornered. But days passed, and she didn't call or text. I checked Grandma often, making sure Clara hadn't tried anything else. Then one evening, Clara burst into Grandma's house while I was there, screaming about how I'd threatened her. She demanded Grandma take her side. Grandma looked frightened and confused. I calmly repeated that Clara had sold Mom's jewelry without my permission and that she owed me half of that money at minimum. Grandma went pale, realizing the full extent. Clara then turned on me, saying I was greedy for wanting my half. I told her that wasn't the point. The point was, she stole from me and from Mom's legacy. Grandma started crying. She said she didn't want this money if it came from something so tainted. She offered to write Clara a check for the full amount just to keep the peace, but I interjected, telling Grandma not to do that. Clara glared at me, realized she wouldn't get a dime of that 10 grand back without returning the stolen. Funds to me as well. I left the house shortly after, telling them both that I'd had enough drama for one night. Clara called me later that evening, crying and begging me not to ruin her life with a lawsuit. I stated calmly that my conditions stood. She agreed to work something out, but I didn't trust her at all. I was determined to see this through. The next day, I contacted my lawyer again and outlined everything that had happened. He advised sending Clara a formal notice demanding payment for half the value of the jewelry sold, along with a cease and desist regarding any further sale of inherited items. We drafted the letter, had it notarized, and sent it via certified mail. Clara received it a few days later. She called me in a panic, saying she'd do whatever it took to avoid going to court. I told her that was fine, but she had to meet my conditions by a certain deadline. She claimed she didn't have the 10 grand anymore, which was obviously a lie because she'd given that money to Grandma and Grandma hadn't spent it. But it turned out Clara had spent a big chunk of her own cut on herself after the sale, so she was strapped for cash again. Typical Clara, blowing everything on luxuries. I didn't care. I told her that was her problem to solve. A few days passed without a word. Then, out of nowhere, Grandma called me, saying Clara had returned to her the following day, sobbing and asking for the $10,000 back, claiming it was an emergency. Grandma refused to give it to her, saying she wouldn't take part in the dishonesty. Clara broke down, admitting she'd stolen the jewelry. Grandma told me she felt sorry for Clara, but also betrayed. She asked if I could just forgive Clara for the family's sake, but I refused. Mom always emphasized fairness, and Clara had violated that in a huge way. I told Grandma I'd do what needed to be done. If Clara wanted mercy, she could earn it by telling the truth and making amends. Nothing less would satisfy me. I wasn't going to forgive her just for the sake of family unity. I'd invested too much of my own time, money, and emotional energy into caring for Grandma, and I'd honored Mom's wishes while Clara spit on them. So, no, I wouldn't just roll over. The lawyer's letter gave Clara a deadline of 2 weeks to respond with a plan for repayment. The next days were tense. Clara tried to convince me to drop the whole thing multiple times, saying she'd find a way to pay me back eventually. I didn't budge. I told her she needed to return the money she'd given Grandma, plus my share of whatever she sold the rest for. She whined that I was being heartless. I reminded her that she'd stolen from me. No apologies had ever come from her, only excuses and blame. With the deadline approaching, Clara finally relented. She showed up at my apartment with tears in her eyes, saying she was willing to sign an agreement to pay me back in monthly installments. I laughed bitterly and told her I'd need a down payment immediately, plus a cosigner, because I didn't trust her to make regular payments. She wailed that she didn't have anyone who could cosign for her. I said that was too bad. I wouldn't accept anything less. I'm sure some people might think I was going too far, but I felt no remorse. She'd made her bed, and I was no longer interested in softening the consequences for her. That same day, I showed her a draft of the complaint I'd have my lawyer file if she refused my terms. She burst into hysterics, claiming I'd destroy her future. I didn't blink. She stomped out. I figured that was that. But 2 days later, she called me and said she'd do it. She had an old high school friend who was willing to co-sign if it meant avoiding a lawsuit. She scraped together $5,000 for an initial payment, borrowed from who knows where. I drew up a contract with my lawyer, spelling out the exact terms. She owed me half the final sale price of all jewelry she'd sold, plus interest and legal fees. If she defaulted, I'd have the right to pursue a lien on any property she might own in the future and sue her friend as well. She balked at the clause about her friend, but I held firm. I'm not usually this ruthless, but I'd reached my limit with Clara. She signed the paperwork. Her friend co-signed, looking visibly nervous. I made a photocopy of their IDs, had everything notarized, then gave Clara a receipt for the $5,000 down payment. She was shaking the whole time, her eyes red from crying. I almost felt a twinge of pity, but then I remembered how she'd casually stolen a piece of our family's history for a few quick bucks. That sympathy evaporated. Over the next few months, Clara made her monthly payments. She had to get a second job to afford them, and from what I heard through family gossip, she was struggling. Good. I'm not a monster, but I'm also not going to pretend I'm sorry she's facing the consequences of her own selfishness. Meanwhile, Grandma still has the $10,000 in a separate account. She wanted to give it back to me, but I insisted she keep it for herself. After all, she's the one I've been taking care of all these years, and she deserves that financial cushion. Clara doesn't dare ask for that money back now. If she does, I can easily amend the contract to reflect an even bigger debt. As it stands, she owes me a hefty sum that will take her years to pay off. And I haven't forgiven her. I don't plan to. She betrayed me, betrayed our mother, and tried to pass it off as some grand gesture of love to Grandma. That's unforgivable in my book. Family or not, I've learned my lesson. I no longer trust Clara with anything remotely valuable. I see her only at family gatherings. Sometimes she tries to play nice, acting like nothing ever happened. I keep it civil for Grandma's sake, but there's no warmth between us. She blew that bridge up the moment she decided to sell Mom's jewelry. It's been a while since all this went down, and I've come to terms with the fact that some heirlooms might be gone forever. I try not to dwell on it. I've taken the rest of the jewelry and locked it away, safe from Clara. Grandma and I still have a close bond. She feels guilty for the friction in the family, but I assure her it's not her fault. She was just a pawn in Clara's manipulative game. As for Clara, she's slowly chipping away at her debt. Every time I get a payment notification, I'm reminded of how she tried to cheat me and ended up stuck paying way more than she would have if she'd been honest. My cousins have asked me if I'll ever forgive Clara once this is all behind us. Honestly, I doubt it. She showed me exactly who she is when she saw nothing wrong with stealing from our mother's inheritance. Even if she pays every last cent, there's no erasing the betrayal. I'll remain civil for Grandma, but that's where it ends. Revenge, in my eyes, doesn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just ensuring the other person faces the consequences of their actions and sees what they've lost. That's what happened here. Clara lost my trust, lost her free ride, and now she's effectively in debt to me for the foreseeable future. She gets no sympathy from me, and I certainly don't regret making her life harder. She made her choice when she betrayed me and Mom. To anyone reading this who might think I'm cruel, I get it. But you weren't the one who had your mother's last wishes trampled on, who saw your sibling profit off sentimental items that can never be replaced. You also didn't watch your grandmother get dragged into it so someone could pretend to be the generous granddaughter. I considered myself a rational person who never rushed major decisions. Yet, I still walked into the biggest heartbreak of my life. I married the woman I believed was my perfect match, only to discover she'd been lying about her ex for years. This wasn't about harmless white lies. She'd crafted a betrayal so elaborate, I had no clue what was happening right under my nose. It started back in college, where she dated a guy who seemed to have a hold on her from day one. She swore he was the worst decision of her life, controlling, cheating, draining her finances, sabotaging friendships. When we got together, she claimed to have blocked him everywhere. She insisted he'd moved 3 states away, that their relationship was permanently over. I believed her. I trusted her. After all, she was the woman I asked to marry me, my confidant, my partner, and for years, my best friend. We celebrated birthdays, confided in each other about work stress, and daydreamed about the future. She seemed earnest and loyal. I thought we shared everything, that no secret could slip past us. Not once did I suspect how wrong I was. No matter how careful I'd been in other aspects of my life, I let my guard down with her. She had a way of looking at me that made me believe every word she said. I ignored the occasional red flags, convinced that love conquers all. It was truly the biggest mistake I ever made. A month before our wedding, a mutual friend dropped a bomb. He told me my fiancée had been in touch with her ex. Alarmed but trying to stay calm, I confronted her. She teared up immediately, saying he'd reached out to apologize for his behavior. She claimed she'd shut him down and had no intention of seeing him again. She looked so genuine, trembling lip and all, that I chose to believe her. I told myself everyone deserves closure, and if she said it was nothing, it must be nothing. I did a guilty check of her phone once, found nothing suspicious, and felt a wave of relief. She must have been telling the truth, right? Looking back, I cringe at how naive I was. She was already an expert at hiding her tracks. I didn't know about secret apps or fake contact names. I didn't realize that her ex hadn't moved away at all. Instead, he was right here in the same city, planning to crash our future. But at the time, I dismissed every doubt. We were busy preparing for the wedding, finalizing details, sending out invitations. She seemed devoted and excited, always talking about how she wanted our families to blend and how she couldn't wait to spend forever with me. It never occurred to me that she might be lying through her teeth, promising a faithfulness she had no intention of upholding. That conversation with our friend should have been my wake-up call, but I slept through it. On our wedding day, I was all smiles. Friends said we looked radiant, locked in a dream. She exchanged vows, promising loyalty and unconditional love. I drank in every word, oblivious to the secrets buried beneath her polished exterior. The first year of marriage was actually wonderful. We took a short honeymoon trip, moved into a cozy apartment, and started discussing future plans like buying a house or having kids. She'd hint at names, showing me pictures of cute nurseries. It felt surreal how blissful everything seemed. Occasionally, I'd recall that one warning about her ex, but she'd reassure me. She'd say he was gone and that his number was blocked. I accepted it, wanting so badly to believe. Though she guarded her phone more than before, I never pushed too hard. Everyone deserves some privacy, right? Whenever I felt a flicker of unease, I'd bury it. I loved her deeply, and I wanted our marriage to succeed. I told myself trust was key. She'd done such a convincing job that I actually felt guilty if I even thought about snooping. So I stayed in the dark, while she kept in touch with him behind my back. Looking back, I wonder if certain friends or family suspected something but remained silent. If they did, they never shared it. I kept living in that bubble of newlywed optimism, convinced we were on the same page, forging a path forward together. Little did I know she was forging a different path entirely. Eventually, subtle signs crept in. She'd work late more often, saying deadlines had piled up, or a colleague needed help. I remember fixing dinner, waiting for her texts, only to receive a single vague message about being stuck. When she came home, she looked tired but oddly energized, as if running on adrenaline. Sometimes I'd glimpse her phone lighting up and she'd hurry to silence it. When I asked, she'd shrug and say it was just a coworker or her mom. I wanted to believe her, so I ignored the uneasy feeling in my gut. The real blow came when I tried to print documents from her laptop one evening. I saw an open chat minimized at the bottom of the screen. His name wasn't visible, but the conversation told me everything. They were talking about meeting soon, referencing inside jokes, and sharing details about how they'd kept everything hidden. My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message, seeing how long this had been going on. She'd been sleeping with him, comparing me to him, even laughing at my cluelessness. I felt numb. Rather than confront her immediately, I closed the chat, printed my files, and acted normal. I needed time to process, to figure out my next move. My heart pounded the whole night, but I lay beside her as if nothing had changed. In that moment, I realized trusting her blindly had been a colossal mistake. I was ready to expose the truth, but not without a plan. I spent the next week gathering proof. Late at night, I'd wait until she was asleep, then check her phone. She had hidden messages saved under alias contacts, detailing how and when they'd meet. I took screenshots, emailed them to a secure folder, and made sure to cover my tracks. The extent of their affair was devastating. It had begun before we were even married, right under my nose. They talked about me like I was a predictable safety net, someone she could rely on while getting her thrills elsewhere. I discovered he hadn't moved away. That was her biggest lie. He lived across town, and they met whenever they could slip away unnoticed. My anger grew with every new piece of evidence. I fought the urge to scream at her, to throw accusations, but I held it in. I wanted her to think everything was normal. Her behavior didn't change. She texted him in the bathroom, whispered with him on her lunch break, and came home to me with that same sweet smile. I felt sick just looking at her. But I channeled that fury into a purpose. I wasn't going to be her fool anymore. I scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer, explaining everything and showing him the proof. He advised me to keep documenting, to be patient, and to prepare for confrontation at just the right moment. I agreed. If she wanted to live a lie, I'd give her one final performance. When I felt confident I had enough evidence, I decided to test her further. One night, she came home late, and I casually asked if she'd ever consider an open relationship. Her eyes lit up in surprise before she quickly masked it. She hesitated, then admitted she'd been thinking about the concept. She framed it as a modern approach to marriage, how it could bring us closer by exploring outside connections. I nearly laughed in her face. She was trying to spin her cheating into some grand philosophical stance. I told her I was curious but needed time to think. She looked relieved, as if I'd validated her twisted fantasy of having both me and her ex with zero consequences. Of course, she didn't know I was already planning my exit. I kept playing along. I pretended to entertain discussions about boundaries and rules, acting like the dedicated husband who just wanted her to be happy. Deep down, my blood boiled. Her audacity was breathtaking. She was openly admitting she wanted to sleep with someone else, most likely the same man she'd denied having any contact with. I found myself both furious and strangely amused by how bold her lies were. Part of me wondered if she got a thrill from fooling me, or if she truly believed I was that naive. Either way, I was done being her unwitting accomplice. I would let her believe she was safe, right up until the moment I revealed how wrong she was. I bided my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to confront her with every shred of proof. I wanted to see that look in her eyes when she realized she'd lost everything. Meanwhile, I followed my lawyer's advice, checking financial records, making sure I had documentation of our assets. I knew she'd fight me if she sensed a divorce looming. She might beg or she might rage, but either way, I wanted to walk away on my own terms. Then, the day came when I caught her leaving work earlier than she'd claimed. I followed her from a distance, watching her drive across town. She parked outside a shabby building I instantly recognized from her secret texts. I waited, snapped photos on my phone as she greeted him with a kiss, then disappeared inside. My hands trembled with a potent mix of anger and triumph. I had her cornered. There would be no excuses, no denial that this was innocent. I left before they emerged. Seeing them together made my stomach twist. Still, I felt a grim satisfaction that my evidence was now undeniable. That night, I acted normal again. She came home, spun a story about working late, and I nodded, letting her lies wash over me. It was almost surreal how easily she could slip into her routine, as if I were just a background character in her elaborate play. Little did she know the curtain was about to fall and I was about to bring the whole thing crashing down. I invited her to sit in the living room, saying I wanted to revisit our open relationship talk. She looked a bit apprehensive, but also hopeful. Before she could speak, I placed a folder on the coffee table. I told her to open it. Inside were printed screenshots, phone logs, photos of her entering that building, and even some of her more incriminating messages. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the pages. She stammered, asking where I got all this. I stayed silent, letting the images speak for themselves. Her voice rose, trying to deny or minimize each piece of evidence, but it was obvious she was cornered. Finally, she broke down, sobbing that it had started as a mistake and spiraled out of control. She begged me to understand that she still loved me, that this was just something she couldn't let go of. My anger boiled over. I told her I wasn't there for confessions or apologies. I had consulted a lawyer. Divorce papers were ready. I offered her a simple choice: sign the uncontested papers or watch as I exposed everything to her family, our friends, and even her workplace if necessary. She stared at me in disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks, calling me cruel. I reminded her that she was the one who shattered our marriage vows. I was simply ensuring I wouldn't be walked over again. I refused to forgive. There would be no acceptance of her betrayal, only consequences. She begged me to let her explain, to try counseling or therapy. She swore she would break it off with him, that she'd do anything to fix our marriage. My stomach churned at the hypocrisy. She'd already tried turning it into an open relationship, hoping I'd give her explicit permission to keep sleeping with her ex. I told her that was never going to happen. She switched tactics, accusing me of invading her privacy and betraying her trust by gathering evidence in secret. The irony made me laugh out loud. I reminded her how she'd systematically lied to me for years, how she'd orchestrated secret meetings and used hidden apps. If anyone had demolished trust, it was her. I gave her a deadline to sign the papers, making it clear that if she fought me on this, I wouldn't hesitate to drag her reputation through the mud. It was harsh, but my patience was gone. She looked at the divorce papers in horror, as if she couldn't believe this was happening. It dawned on her that the safety net she'd relied on was gone. I could see the gears turning, wondering if her ex would catch her when she fell. That wasn't my problem. This was the path she chose, and I was done protecting her from the fallout. She retreated to the bedroom, sobbing. I stood there, numb but oddly liberated. I'd finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't about to second-guess that decision. The following days were a whirlwind. She oscillated between anger, pleading, and defiance. Sometimes she'd approach me in tears, begging for another chance. Other times she'd lash out, calling me cold and vindictive. I stayed firm, refusing to budge. I reminded her this was exactly the future she'd been courting all along. She tried to bring up the possibility of us sharing each other, but I cut her off. There was no reality where I'd remain married to a woman who treated me as her backup plan. I made that crystal clear. Behind the scenes, I arranged to shift my direct deposits and separate finances. I opened a new bank account she knew nothing about. My lawyer drafted a settlement that offered her little more than her personal belongings and a portion of our joint savings. That was generous, considering she'd contributed far less to our shared assets. She refused to sign at first, insisting she deserved more. I reminded her that if we went to court, I'd present all the evidence of her long-term affair, which could hurt her chances in any settlement negotiation. She crumpled at that, realizing she had no leverage. Meanwhile, mutual friends started asking questions. I didn't air all the dirty laundry, just said we were divorcing due to irreconcilable differences. Most people respected my privacy, though a few pressed me for details. She tried to spin her own version of events, but I had enough proof on standby to refute any outright lies if needed. A week later, she sat at the dining table, pen in hand, tears in her eyes, staring at the divorce papers. She'd run out of stall tactics. Without looking at me, she signed them. I took them to the notary that afternoon. The sense of closure was immediate, like a weight lifting off my chest. Yes, we still had to wait for the legal process, but the biggest hurdle was cleared. She asked if there was any chance I'd reconsider. I told her no. Her crocodile tears did nothing for me. I offered to help her move out, but she declined. Over the next few days, she packed her stuff in tense silence. Occasionally, she'd try to talk about the good times we'd shared, maybe hoping to spark my nostalgia. I felt nothing but resentment. The woman I fell in love with wasn't real. She was a mask. She had no remorse until she got caught. I let her see how indifferent I'd become. After she hauled her last box out the door, she paused in the hallway, waiting for me to say something. I gave her a nod, then shut the door. That was it. The marriage was over, and I felt no regret. I'd loved her once, but now all I felt was relief that I'd escaped her web of lies. She wanted forgiveness, but I had no intention of granting it. Her tears meant nothing. She made her choices, and she'd live with them. Once she was gone, I purged every reminder of her from the apartment. Photos, mementos, and keepsakes went into a storage bin. I shoved into the back of the closet. I needed my space free of her memory, at least until I figured out where to move next. Friends asked if I was okay, and I told them I would be. Some expressed surprise at how calm I seemed, but they hadn't seen how twisted things really were. After living under constant deception for so long, the abrupt clarity felt like stepping into fresh air. My lawyer confirmed the paperwork was in order, and we just had to wait for the final decree. I got updates that she moved in with her ex. Maybe that was her only option. I felt a stab of bitterness, wondering if they'd last or if he'd revert to the same toxic behavior that once tormented her. Either way, I reminded myself it was no longer my concern. I'd done what I needed to do. Occasionally, I'd get texts from her, apologizing or asking me to meet up. I ignored them all. If she thought I'd soften over time, she was sorely mistaken. I'd learned my lesson about trusting her words. The damage was done. My life was better off without her manipulations. Day by day, I focused on rebuilding. I picked up new hobbies, spent more time with close friends, and threw myself into work. The more distance I put between us, the stronger I felt. In the months that followed, people started learning bits and pieces of what really happened. One mutual friend confronted her about the affair, and she reportedly crumbled into tears, blaming her ex for luring her back in. Another friend asked me if I'd ever forgive her. My answer was simple: never. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was a calculated betrayal that spanned years. She had countless opportunities to come clean or break it off, but chose not to. I wasn't going to absolve her just because she felt sorry once her lies were exposed. I heard rumors that she wasn't happy living with him, that he was controlling again. It might have given me grim satisfaction, but I tried not to dwell on her misery. My best revenge was cutting her out of my life completely. No more emotional ties, no more second chances. I let her twist in the wind with the consequences of her decisions. Around this time, I started therapy, mostly to deal with the anger and betrayal. My therapist encouraged me to let go of the bitterness, but I refused to confuse letting go with forgiving. I wanted to move on without carrying her memory like a chain around my neck. Slowly, I managed to do exactly that. When the divorce was finalized, I treated myself to a small celebration with a couple of friends. It wasn't exactly a joyous occasion, but it was the official end of an agonizing chapter. 6 months later, I moved to a new place. The lease on our old apartment ended, and I saw no point staying there with ghosts of the past. Packing up my belongings, I found the storage bin full of reminders. I skimmed through them briefly, old photos of happier times, heartfelt notes that now felt hollow. I tossed most of it, keeping only what I might need for legal or financial reasons. During this process, I didn't shed a single tear. Whatever emotional reservoir I had for her had long since dried up. Word got back to me that she reached out to some of my friends, asking if they could convince me to speak with her. Apparently, she wanted closure or one last conversation. I had zero interest. As far as I was concerned, she lost her right to a heart-to-heart the moment she made me her backup plan. I changed my phone number, blocked her on social media, and continued carving out my new life. There was no place in it for her or her manipulative drama. People sometimes asked if I regretted marrying her in the first place. I don't think regret is the right word. I learned a harsh lesson about trust, about vigilance, and about refusing to compromise my self-respect. If I'd never married her, maybe I wouldn't have learned just how far someone can go to deceive a person who loves them. That knowledge, painful as it was, shaped me going forward. I channeled my anger into productivity. I picked up extra responsibilities at work, earned a promotion, and used that momentum to invest in myself. I traveled a bit, visited old friends, and reconnected with distant relatives. My family, once fond of my ex, rallied around me once they understood the depth of her betrayal. I remember my mother's teary outrage, stunned that someone could lie so extensively. I had to reassure her that I was actually better off alone than trapped in that toxic marriage. Gradually, the raw pain faded into a dull ache. I still felt flashes of anger when memories surfaced, but therapy and time helped me process it. I wasn't looking for a rebound or any quick fix. I wanted to rebuild my life with a clear mind, unburdened by bitterness. When I was ready to date again, I promised myself I'd never ignore red flags for the sake of an idealized romance. I'm sure there are decent people out there, but I'll be damned if I ever allow someone to gaslight me the way she did. I made it my mission to trust my instincts more. If something feels off, I won't hesitate to ask questions. I might be more guarded now, but that's the cost of surviving a betrayal like hers. The scars remain, serving as reminders of what I endured. At least they remind me I'm stronger and wiser for it. I'm sharing this story because I'm finally in a place where I can talk about it without rage swallowing me whole. Some might say I should forgive, that holding on to anger isn't healthy. I respectfully disagree. Forgiveness is a gift I reserve for those who show genuine remorse, who haven't systematically lied and manipulated me for years. She wanted to eat her cake and keep it too, to have both her ex and me at her beck and call. When that blew up in her face, she only cried because she was caught. She never once apologized before I forced her hand. If she had come clean earlier, maybe we could have discussed separation or therapy in a more honest context. But that wasn't her style. She pushed me to the edge, hoping I'd remain clueless forever or agree to let her see him openly. That level of disrespect isn't something I'm willing to forgive, no matter how many tears she sheds. This might sound harsh, but I'm not ashamed of it. I took the high road by not dragging her through public humiliation once she signed the divorce papers. I could have, but I didn't. That was mercy enough. These days, I focus on my present and future, not the past. My life is quieter, simpler, and infinitely more honest. I've learned the value of real trust and mutual respect, lessons I carry into every new relationship, friendship, or even casual interaction. So, this is how it ends. I married a woman who promised me the world, then lived a secret life with the ex she supposedly despised. When caught, she wanted an open relationship, effectively asking me to endorse her infidelity. Instead, I gathered my evidence, confronted her with the facts, and refused her pleas for forgiveness. She signed the papers, moved out, and left me to rebuild the life she nearly destroyed. My revenge wasn't explosive or theatrical, it was methodical, legal, and final. I took back control of my finances, my dignity, and my future. That was enough to give me the closure I needed. Let her stay with her ex or chase whatever fleeting highs she needs. I won't be there to pick up the pieces when it falls apart. She gambled on my kindness and she lost. I won't pretend to be a saint here. I felt genuine satisfaction watching her face the consequences. But I'm not proud of that part. It's simply the truth. Betrayal cuts deep, and sometimes the only real justice is ensuring the betrayer can't hurt you again. If she's out there telling people, I'm a monster, so be it. I know my side of the story, and I have the receipts to back it up. I'm done with her games, done pretending I don't see what's right in front of me. The lesson is burned into my mind. Never ignore your instincts, especially when someone begs you to trust them blindly. That's the story of how I discovered my wife's secret affair with her supposedly gone ex and how her request for an open marriage was the final straw. She betrayed me, lied to me, and then tried to spin her cheating into some enlightened relationship model. I refused to forgive, opting instead for the only path that made sense: divorce on my terms, armed with all the evidence she never believed I'd gather. In the aftermath, I found a strength in myself I never knew existed. I learned that choosing myself isn't selfish. It's necessary when someone else is using you like a doormat. Though it hurt like hell to end a relationship I once cherished, it would have hurt even more to stay. If anyone reading this wonders whether they should dig deeper when suspicions arise, my advice is to trust your gut. Ask questions, set boundaries, and never let someone guilt trip you into silence. If you find deception at the core, don't be afraid to protect your interests. Sometimes people don't deserve a second chance, or even closure. Sometimes The best revenge is simply taking back your life and leaving them behind to deal with the wreckage they created. I look at where I am now, finally free from her constant lies, forging new friendships, and rebuilding my foundation. And I feel nothing but relief. She wanted me to stay and accept her twisted arrangement, but I chose to walk away with my head held high. That's the greatest victory I could have asked for. I'm not proud of how obsessed I've become with payback, but I also can't pretend I'm sorry. The day my in-laws demanded I sign that prenup was the day I realized they never truly saw me as part of their family. They treated me like I was some gold-digging scammer out to exploit their precious daughter. At the time, I swallowed my pride because I loved her more than my own ego. Their conditions were humiliating, but I figured it was a small sacrifice to win the trust and acceptance of the only family she had left. My parents died when I was too young to even remember. Her parents were always protective, but that prenup took it to a whole new level. I could practically see them counting my pennies, smirking at my modest salary. I tried to brush it off, thinking love would conquer all. Little did they know, I was on the verge of launching my dream startup. It wasn't exactly well-funded at first, and I was scraping by on credit cards, ramen noodles, and late nights spent coding. But I had this vision that wouldn't let me sleep. My wife supported me, or so I believed. She said all the right things, even helped me brainstorm ideas. But when her parents insisted on the prenup, she refused to defend me. She said it was just to put their minds at ease and that it had nothing to do with me personally. That stung. I told myself it wasn't her fault and that she was just torn between her parents and me. Still, it was the first sign that our relationship wasn't as strong as I believed. I kept going though, determined to prove myself to everyone. So I hustled, coded, sacrificed, hoping they'd see me differently. Soon after our wedding, I was able to secure an angel investor who believed in my idea. That investment changed everything. I worked insane hours, poured my soul into the project, and watched as it finally took off. The first real revenue came from a licensing deal with a mid-sized tech company. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to show potential. That's when bigger investors started sniffing around. By the time I turned 30, my net worth was higher than I'd ever dared imagine. My in-laws didn't notice at first, or if they did, they pretended not to care. They were too busy bragging about their own status. My father-in-law ran a successful chain of dealerships, and my mother-in-law enjoyed flaunting what she thought was high-class living. They'd throw these lavish parties, inviting everyone who was anyone in their circle. My wife always wanted to impress them, so she'd dress in designer outfits while reminding me to not talk about my startup too much. She claimed her parents were old-fashioned and would never understand the tech world. I went along with it. I didn't want to stir the pot or come off as a show-off. When I did drop the occasional hint that business was going well, my father-in-law would smirk and say, "It's good to have a hobby, just don't let it distract you from real work." It took everything in me not to correct him. I noticed my wife becoming more reserved around me as my success grew. She no longer asked about my goals or my day. She spent more time with her parents, who still treated me like a second-class citizen. But I wasn't naive. I saw the looks they gave each other whenever money was mentioned. I knew envy when I saw it. Undeniable. Things reached a tipping point 2 years ago when my company merged with a larger tech firm. Suddenly, I wasn't just comfortable, I was wealthy. My name started appearing in articles about young entrepreneurs to watch. My father-in-law no longer smirked. He actually asked me to invest in one of his side projects. That was new. He'd never asked me for anything except to keep my voice down. My mother-in-law began mentioning how proud they were of me. This was a radical shift from all the times she'd made passive-aggressive remarks about me leeching off their daughter. I felt uneasy, but I wanted to believe they'd finally accepted me. They invited me and my wife to a family dinner, which turned out to be a surprise celebration for my success. It felt forced, but I tried to appreciate the effort. Then my father-in-law cornered me after dessert, asking if we could rip up the prenup. He said it was a silly formality that no longer made sense, now that we had equal standing. I told him it wasn't that simple, because the prenup had legal implications we couldn't just dismiss. I also admitted I liked having some protection, given how quickly fortunes can change in business. He didn't like that answer, but he didn't press too hard, at least not then. That night, my wife told me her parents had been pestering her about the prenup. She asked me if I would consider dropping it to show I trusted her. I asked, "Do you really think I don't trust you?" She backpedaled, claiming she just wanted to keep the peace, but something inside me snapped. I had sacrificed so much for this marriage. I was never the one who insisted on a prenup. They were. Was it on me to tear it up? Over the next few months, her parents ramped up their campaign. They claimed the prenup was a slap in the face, making it look like I believed their daughter was a gold digger. Funny, that's exactly how they treated me. My wife kept pressuring me to reconsider. She'd text me at work with messages like, "Are we really supposed to live under this cloud forever?" I tried explaining that it only mattered if we divorced, which I never planned to do. So why were they so desperate to remove it unless they were thinking about a possible split? She had no good answer. When my company expanded to a second location, my mother-in-law made a snide remark. "I hope all this success doesn't go to your head. We don't want you forgetting your roots." I nearly lost it. My roots were humble, sure, but I'd made every cent through my own blood, sweat, and tears. I never asked them for a dime. Meanwhile, they'd forced me to sign a document treating me like a financial parasite. The hypocrisy was glaring. My wife started avoiding serious conversations. She'd leave the room whenever I brought up the prenup situation. Eventually, she admitted that her parents were suggesting a backup plan. If I refused to cancel the prenup, she should consider divorce. They'd told her she would get some beneficial settlement because of how the agreement was worded, especially with the business growth. That's when I realized they were actively trying to sabotage our marriage. My breaking point came after I overheard my father-in-law telling my wife that I was turning into an arrogant jerk who only cared about money. He insisted she protect herself by talking to a lawyer in case. This betrayal cut deep. I couldn't look at them without seething. Enough. I confronted my wife that night. She admitted her parents wanted her to threaten me with divorce if I refused to rip up the prenup. She said she hadn't agreed yet, but she was considering it because they'd convinced her it was the only way to prove our marriage was built on trust. I asked what kind of marriage requires proof of trust through legal documents. She cried and said she was stuck in the middle. I told her that was nonsense. She was a grown woman who could think for herself. If she loved me, she'd see I never asked for this arrangement. Her silence spoke volumes. I realized she wasn't just a victim of her parents' manipulations. She'd chosen to side with them. I felt something inside me die that night. The love I had for her was overshadowed by a sense of betrayal. But I kept my cool. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. I contacted a top-tier lawyer known for dealing with complex prenups. I wanted to know every angle, every loophole. The lawyer told me that if my wife filed for divorce, the prenup heavily favored me, given how our finances were structured. Ironically, my in-laws had insisted on terms that would protect their daughter from a so-called poor man. But now that I was worth more than 5 times their net worth, the agreement swung in my favor. My wife's share would be minuscule compared to what I'd retain. Plus, I had clauses that ensured my business assets were almost entirely mine. I walked out of that office feeling disgusted and empowered. I decided I wasn't going to be the husband anymore. They wanted a war over money? Fine. I was willing to protect what I'd built, no matter the cost. I started preparing financially and emotionally for the worst. I discreetly opened new business accounts, moved certain intellectual properties under separate entities, and kept meticulous records. My lawyer guided me through every step to ensure I wasn't doing anything illegal, but was fortifying my position. I also hired a private investigator because something told me there was more to this pressure than just paternal meddling. Turns out, I was right. The investigator discovered that my father-in-law had made some bad investments, and his dealerships were teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. He needed a cash infusion to keep them afloat. My mother-in-law was desperate to maintain her lavish lifestyle, so their plan was to strong-arm me into voiding the prenup or push my wife to divorce me and take a chunk of my earnings. They probably assumed I'd cave, wanting to keep the marriage intact. Instead of confronting them with this information right away, I bided my time. My wife grew colder by the day, rarely speaking to me unless it was about money or appearances. She kept nagging me, saying that if I really loved her, I'd sign whatever was needed to get rid of the prenup. I told her love wasn't the issue, it was trust, and they were the ones who'd broken it first. She scoffed, accusing me of sounding like a corporate machine. I decided to show up at one of their family gatherings unannounced. I walked in on my father-in-law bragging to a friend about how we'll be getting a nice payday soon. I quietly recorded a snippet of that conversation on my phone. Then I made my presence known. He looked startled, but quickly recovered and pretended it was just business talk. I smiled and played along, but inside I was furious, absolutely livid. I went home and devised a plan. I had no intention of letting them ruin me or walk away unscathed. First, I confronted my wife. I laid out everything I discovered about her parents' financial woes and their scheme to extort me. She accused me of spying and told me I was crossing a line. I couldn't believe it. She was more upset about me uncovering the truth than about her parents trying to scam me. That's when I realized any love left between us was gone. I told her I was done playing the good guy. If she wanted a divorce, I'd give it to her, but I'd make sure it was on my terms. She stormed out, presumably to call her parents. My lawyer and I filed first, citing irreconcilable differences. Because of the prenup structure, she was set to receive a fraction of what she might have gotten otherwise. It wasn't peanuts, but it was near the grand payday her parents had likely envisioned. A day later, my father-in-law barged into my office, demanding I fix this. He yelled that I was betraying the family, that I was a disgrace, that I'd lured his daughter under false pretenses. I calmly reminded him that they were the ones who drafted and insisted on the prenup. He threatened to smear my name, to accuse me of fraud. I told him I had records of every nasty comment, every manipulative text, and even that audio snippet where he talked about his nice payday. If he wanted a public battle, I'd fight dirty too. He backed down, hurling one last insult before leaving. My wife tried a more emotional approach, claiming she still cared about me and wanted to work it out. I told her we were beyond that. I continued the divorce proceedings as possible. My wife's behavior swung between rage and tears. She accused me of heartlessness, but all I saw was someone upset that her golden ticket was disappearing. We barely spoke except through lawyers. My father-in-law tried to strong-arm me again, claiming he'd go public with some made-up allegations about my business practices. This time, I forwarded his threat to my lawyer, who immediately filed a cease and desist letter. He must have realized I wasn't bluffing because he backed off. During the settlement negotiations, my lawyer presented the details of the prenup they had forced upon me. Their own words came back to haunt them. The clauses were airtight. My wife would get a decent lump sum, but near half of my empire. Her parents showed up uninvited at one mediation session, demanding more. We simply played the audio of him talking about his big payday. The mediator shut them down, warning them that any further intimidation could result in legal consequences. They left in a rage, cursing me and calling me a traitor. My wife eventually signed the agreement, possibly thinking we'd reconcile later if she played along. But the final nail in the coffin came when I moved out of our house and filed a restraining order against her father for harassment. Word got out in their social circle, damaging his reputation. He tried to blame me for everything, but his own arrogance made people question his version of events. A few of his close friends reached out to me, apologizing for not seeing through him earlier. The divorce was finalized last week. She left with her portion, looking and furious. Her parents, drowning in debt, gained nothing more than a tarnished name. I was free, and I was getting started on my revenge. My next move was to leverage my newfound connections. Several influential entrepreneurs and investors knew my story and sympathized with me. I discreetly spread word about my father-in-law's financial desperation. Suddenly, potential bailouts for his dealerships dried up. Banks reconsidered loan extensions, and private financiers backed away. I heard he had to sell 2 of his properties at a loss. My mother-in-law, once the queen of her social circle, found doors closing on her. People she'd looked down on refused to invite her anywhere. Her power in that little ecosystem evaporated. Meanwhile, I expanded my business. I started a mentorship program for underprivileged youth who wanted to break into tech. It was something close to my heart. I remembered how my in-laws had once looked at me as if I were worth nothing. I wanted to ensure talented kids wouldn't have to face that kind of stigma. That program received high-profile attention, boosting my reputation further. I wasn't doing it for publicity, but the positive press didn't hurt. My ex-wife reached out to me through a mutual friend, asking if we could talk. I refused. The lawyer handled any necessary communication. As far as I was concerned, she'd made her choice when she tried to coerce me into ripping up the prenup. She and her parents had seen me as a meal ticket, and now they were cut off. I felt a twinge of sadness sometimes, remembering the early days when I thought she truly loved me. But I couldn't forget how quickly she'd turned once her parents whispered in her ear. I heard rumors that she was struggling, forced to downgrade her lifestyle. Her parents blamed me for their woes. I almost sorry for them, but I remembered how they'd plotted against me. Pity wasn't in my vocabulary anymore. I haven't forgiven them, and I never will. They tried to use me, break me, and toss me aside. Now they're the ones who've lost everything that mattered. My ex-wife's attempts to reconcile are met with silence. Her parents can wallow in their ruined finances. As for me, I'm focused on my company and the new life I've built without them. The best revenge, they say, is living well, and I've taken that to heart. I make sure every success story about my growth reaches the same social circles that once ridiculed me. I don't lie or exaggerate. I simply let the numbers speak. People ask me if I regret any part of this. Honestly, I regret believing that love would be enough to overcome greed. I regret thinking her parents would eventually accept me, but I don't regret signing that prenup. It protected me when they all turned on me. I don't regret fighting back either. They drew first blood, and I had every right to defend myself. Some folks might say I've become spiteful, but after what I went through, I think I've earned the right to bitterness. Last week, I received an email from my ex-wife's cousin, thanking me for the mentorship program. Her son was accepted and found a path in tech he never thought possible. That's the kind of message that reminds me why I do what I do. Maybe that's how I know I'm not the villain they painted me to be. Yes, I took revenge. Yes, I refused to be stepped on. But I also used my position to help people who truly needed it. In the end, I feel no shame for protecting myself. They betrayed me. They reaped what they sowed. And I'm at peace with how it all turned out. I've known my brother Daniel to be a charmer since our early teens. People always said he had a smile that could melt hearts, and he took full advantage of that. I never imagined, though, that this charm would turn on me. Growing up, we were tight. We'd go to baseball games, spend weekends gaming, and share inside jokes only siblings understand. But as time went on, subtle lines formed in our relationship. I noticed him getting overly competitive, especially when it came to girls. Back then, I wrote it off as typical sibling rivalry. Now I realize I was ignoring warning signs. In high school, I met Jess, who would later become my wife. She was quiet, funny, and unlike anyone I'd ever known. We started dating when we were seniors, and I felt an instant bond with her. Daniel was a junior at the time. Although he didn't make a huge show of it, I spotted little hints of jealousy whenever Jess was around. He'd try to make jokes that put me on the spot, or he'd brag about how many girls liked him. He'd ask Jess odd questions about her interests, as if he wanted to gauge her taste in guys. At first, I dismissed it. After all, siblings can be weird, and Daniel was still young. But as the years progressed, those small moments became bigger. There was the time he asked Jess to help him pick out a present for a girl he claimed to be seeing. Then there was the time I found random texts from him on her phone at odd hours. Still, Jess swore nothing was happening behind my back. She chalked it up to Daniel's flirty nature. For my sanity, I convinced myself it was harmless, though my instincts told me to watch out. After we all graduated, Jess and I stuck together through college. Daniel went to a nearby university. Whenever we visited home, he seemed thrilled to see Jess. He acted like it was just friendly excitement, but there was a certain intensity in his eyes I couldn't ignore. Still, I believed Jess was committed to me, and Daniel, while annoying, was my brother. I didn't want to stir up conflict without concrete evidence. I knew she wasn't interested in him, so I reasoned that as long as she stayed faithful, nothing else mattered. I proposed to Jess during our final year of college, and she said yes. It was the happiest moment of my life. My parents were thrilled, and our friends congratulated us nonstop. Daniel didn't share that same enthusiasm. He said all the right words, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. During the engagement party, he stayed close to Jess, almost hovering. When I caught him staring at her once, he looked away immediately, like he'd been caught in a private moment. I tried not to think too hard about it, telling myself that it was just my imagination. Over the next few months, wedding plans took over our lives. Jess and I were navigating everything from the guest list to the seating arrangements. My parents insisted we invite the entire family, including second cousins we never saw, and Jess wanted a smaller, more intimate ceremony. We tried to compromise by organizing a moderately sized event with our closest friends and family. My best friend Logan would be my best man, and Daniel would be one of my groomsmen. We had arguments like any engaged couple, but for the most part, things were on track. We were excited. I never guessed my brother was planning something sinister. About 2 months before the wedding, I started hearing rumors that my ex-girlfriend Emily was planning to come. Now, Emily and I had an ugly breakup years ago. She'd been manipulative, jealous, and constantly stirring drama in my life. We parted ways after I found out she'd been lying about just about everything, including money and random affairs she never fully admitted. I hadn't heard from her since graduation, and there was no reason for her to be at my wedding. But rumor said she had an invite. Confused, I asked Jess, and she immediately denied inviting Emily. My parents had no reason to invite her either. The next person on the list was Daniel, but I couldn't figure out why he'd do that. It didn't make sense. He hated Emily, or so I thought. I decided I needed clarity, so I went to Daniel's place and asked him outright. He feigned ignorance, swearing he didn't know what I was talking about. He even acted insulted that I'd suspect him. It left me with no answers and a bad feeling in my gut. Then I started finding evidence in the form of social media messages. Emily had posted a cryptic status referencing a big day in the family. She didn't say names, but she mentioned she was hoping to reconnect with old flames. A mutual friend of ours confirmed Emily was bragging about being invited to a wedding, though she refused to clarify whose. I confronted Daniel again, and he still denied everything. Jess told me to drop it, saying Emily was probably just being her old manipulative self. But I couldn't let it go. Something felt off. 2 weeks before the wedding, I finally got the truth. A friend who worked at a stationery store told me Daniel had placed a special order for invitations. She was the manager and recognized my family name. She said Daniel requested an extra invitation to be printed with the date and location of our wedding, which he picked up in person. I felt my blood boil. He had gone behind my back to invite my ex to my own wedding. That confirmed everything I feared. Daniel wasn't just a flirty nuisance. He was actively trying to sabotage me and Jess. I confronted him the same day. He tried to backtrack, claiming he was only doing it to add drama and excitement to the ceremony, that he thought it would be fun for old high school friends to show up. When I demanded he call Emily and disinvite her, he shrugged. He said it was done and that she deserved closure or some nonsense like that. I realized then this wasn't just about grudges. He was bringing my manipulative ex into my wedding, knowing full well the damage she could cause. I saw the smug satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted chaos. I told Jess everything, and she was livid, demanding to know why Daniel would do that to us. I had no exact answer except the long-running suspicion he was jealous and held a crush on her. Maybe he hoped the appearance of my ex would stir enough drama to derail the wedding. Jess and I decided not to let him succeed. We informed security that Emily was banned. We told them to watch for anyone not on the guest list. We weren't about to let Daniel ruin our day. This was our wedding, and we would stand united against his schemes. On the wedding day, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting Emily to show up uninvited. Daniel arrived early, wearing a cocky grin and acting like everything was normal. My best friend Logan rolled his eyes at the fake display. Jess looked gorgeous, and I focused on her, refusing to let my brother's schemes overshadow our happiness. During the ceremony, I spotted Emily slipping in near the back. My heart sank, but I squeezed Jess's hand and kept going. Daniel smirked, clearly proud of his work. I vowed not to let them win. Jess deserved better, and so did I. We exchanged vows amid murmurs from guests who noticed Emily's sudden appearance. Still, the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and we shared our first kiss as a married couple. The applause felt surreal. We walked back up the aisle, and that's when Emily emerged from the crowd, trying to corner me. Logan and another groomsman stepped in, blocking her. She shouted something about wanting closure, but they led her away before she could start a scene. Daniel watched with a smug grin. Jess glared at him, but we held our ground. It was our moment, and we refused to surrender. Later, during the reception, Emily tried to slip back in. Security caught her at the entrance and told her to leave. She made a dramatic fuss, saying she had a right to speak with me, but they weren't having it. Jess and I got updates from Logan, who watched the whole scene unfold. Daniel pretended ignorance, shrugging whenever anyone questioned him. He avoided me most of the night, probably knowing I was furious. Despite the drama, Jess and I danced, toasted, cut the cake, and tried to salvage our night. We refused to let him take this away from us completely. In the days that followed, rage simmered inside me. Daniel crossed a line I never imagined. I realized I had more leverage than I thought. He had a pregnant girlfriend, Becca, who was close to her due date. I knew he was cheating on her because I'd caught him in lies before. I also heard rumors from mutual friends that he went out clubbing and met random women. Becca believed he was devoted. If he wanted to destroy my marriage, I had every reason to expose his hypocrisy and set Becca free. He deserved payback, and I wasn't going to forgive. I started gathering evidence. My friend Logan worked at a bar Daniel frequented. He confirmed Daniel was there with different women almost weekly, openly flirting. I scoured social media and found posts of Daniel bragging about his wild nights, though he never mentioned Becca. I compiled screenshots and testimonies. I even discovered private messages on a shared family computer he'd forgotten to log out of. They revealed explicit conversations with multiple women. My anger only grew, but I stayed methodical. If I was doing this, I wanted it to be undeniable. I would confront him through Becca and expose the truth. I felt a twinge of guilt because Becca was innocent in this. She deserved better than a cheating partner, but part of me also worried about stressing her out so late in her pregnancy. Still, I remembered the betrayal at my wedding, how Daniel smirked while Emily tried to ruin our vows. I pushed past any hesitation. If he could sabotage my life during one of my biggest moments, I had no obligation to protect his secrets. Becca deserved the truth, and I deserved retribution. No forgiveness for him, only a reckoning that matched the pain he caused. I steeled myself. A week after the wedding, I dropped by the apartment Daniel shared with Becca. He wasn't home, so she let me in, happily chatting about how excited they were for the baby. My anger flared just hearing her talk so lovingly about him. She offered me tea. I refused politely, then sat her down and explained that I had something important to show her. Confusion flickered across her face as I pulled out my phone, opening the folder of screenshots. One by one, I presented Daniel's infidelity. She paled. Tears welled, and she silently scrolled. I felt no pleasure, grim resolve. Becca started crying, quietly at first, then harder until she was sobbing uncontrollably. I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling terrible for bringing her that pain, but also convinced she needed to know. She asked me why I was doing this, so I told her about Daniel's sabotage of my wedding and his history of lying. She shook her head, stunned by the betrayal. Then she began thanking me for being honest, saying she would rather face the truth now than live in denial. I offered to help her however I could, but she said she needed time alone first. I left the apartment feeling a twisted mix of triumph and pity. Daniel deserved this. He had toyed with my marriage and never thought twice about Becca's well-being. Now his facade was shattered. That evening, he called me, cursing and demanding to know what I'd done. He spewed insults, accusing me of ruining his family. I reminded him he ruined mine first. He claimed it was a harmless joke, that Emily was never a real threat. I didn't bother responding to his lame excuses. He raged on, blaming me for everything. I hung up, content that my revenge had struck home. Over the next few days, my parents got involved. They begged me to reconcile with Daniel, arguing that family mattered more than grudges. I refused. I told them what he did at my wedding, how he continued lying, and how he didn't care about Becca. They were horrified, but hoped I'd let it go for the baby's sake. Jess and I discussed it. We agreed Daniel was toxic. We wouldn't let him near us unless he owned his actions and apologized. My parents asked me to be patient, but I wouldn't budge. I refused to enable him anymore. He'd earned it. Meanwhile, Becca moved out of the apartment, staying with her sister. She texted me to say she planned on getting a paternity test once the baby arrived, though she was fairly sure Daniel was the father. She told me she couldn't trust him anymore and didn't want to raise a child in that environment. Daniel called me, ranting that I'd destroyed his life, but I felt no remorse. He made his choices, and I merely illuminated them. Jess backed me up, reminding me that he had nearly ruined our wedding. Now he was facing the aftermath. It was his fault. Jess and I focused on each other, trying to move past the wedding fiasco. We visited friends, took a honeymoon, and started building our life together. Occasionally, I'd get updates about Daniel from family. He was spiraling, partying even more, blaming me for Becca's departure. Nobody bought his excuses. My parents were disappointed but tried to remain neutral, hoping time would heal things. I never forgot the hurt he caused, and I maintained my stance. I wouldn't forgive him unless he acknowledged everything. Months passed, and he remained stubbornly unapologetic. I felt justified in my revenge, refusing to back down. Several months later, Becca gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She allowed Daniel to see the baby, but she refused to reconcile. She told me Daniel kept begging her for another chance, promising he'd change. From what I heard, he still spent nights out with random women, so I doubted his sincerity. Becca kept me updated, thanking me again for exposing him. She admitted she was heartbroken, but glad she discovered his true character before marrying him. I admired her strength. She deserved happiness, and Daniel didn't deserve her loyalty. I stayed civil when I saw him at family gatherings. My parents tried one last time to mediate a truce. They invited both me and Daniel to dinner, hoping we'd bury the hatchet. Jess agreed to come only if Daniel apologized first. He refused to apologize or admit wrongdoing. At dinner, we barely spoke. He glared at me across the table, calling me petty under his breath. I reminded him of the wedding. He shrugged, insisting again it was a joke. Jess bristled, telling him he had no concept of loyalty. The night ended with an awkward silence. My parents looked defeated, but I felt no shame. He asked for this. After that, I cut all contact except for obligatory family functions. Daniel occasionally texted me rants about how I ruined his life, calling me vindictive. I blocked him. Jess and I were determined to live in peace. We built a happy home together, untainted by Daniel's nonsense. Meanwhile, Becca pressed for custody arrangements and child support. Daniel complained to anyone who would listen that she was being unreasonable. Nobody believed him anymore. He'd lost all credibility. I heard rumors he was still sleeping around, drowning in self-pity. I felt no regret. If he wanted revenge, he'd have to keep waiting. As time passed, I came to terms with losing the brother I thought I had. In truth, he was never the loyal sibling I hoped for. Looking back, I saw the warning signs, his competition, his jealousy over Jess, his manipulative streak. His betrayal at the wedding was just the final push. I found solace in Jess, who reminded me that our marriage was stronger than ever. We defied his sabotage, and I showed him I wouldn't be trampled. The revenge tasted bittersweet, but it was necessary. I refused to regret my actions. He forced my hand, and I played it. Occasionally, I ponder whether I should have stopped at warning Daniel instead of going straight to Becca. But then I remember his smug face at my wedding, the way he intentionally inflicted pain on Jess and me. He crossed that line without remorse. I owed him nothing. By exposing his cheating, I ensured Becca wouldn't be trapped with a liar. She found the courage to leave, which he deserved. He lost his girlfriend, his credibility, and any chance of controlling my life again. Jess stands by my choice, reminding me we can't save everyone. Some people need a harsh lesson first. That's the whole story. My brother tried to sabotage my wedding, so I destroyed his relationship by telling his pregnant girlfriend about his affairs. He never apologized or showed remorse, and I never forgave him. Jess and I remain happily married, our bond stronger for having survived his betrayal. Becca is free from his lies, raising her child in a healthier environment. Daniel still resents me, but that's not my concern. He dug his own grave. Sometimes revenge is the only way to make a betrayer understand the damage they've done. I stand by every choice. My conscience is clear. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd become the target of my own father's greed, but that's exactly what happened. I grew up believing he'd always have my back, no matter what. My mother passed away when I was 15, and it was just the two of us for a long time. He did his best, and I tried to support him in every way. I was the one who saved up for college scholarships and took on part-time jobs to ease our financial burdens. He always told me he was proud of me. When I finished school, I found a decent job in marketing, saved diligently for years, and eventually bought my own house. It wasn't anything lavish, just a modest 3-bedroom in a nice neighborhood, but it was something I worked hard for and was proud of. Dad eventually remarried. I have no problem with the concept of remarriage, but something about his new wife, whom I'll call Teresa, never sat right with me. She was about 10 years younger than Dad, and she had this practiced sweetness about her that reminded me of artificial sweetener. In other words, she seemed nice at first glance, but left a weird aftertaste. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, though. Dad was smitten, and I wanted him to be happy. They had their own place for a while, but Dad called me one afternoon sounding embarrassed. He told me he'd been laid off from his job in construction and had trouble finding something else. Teresa wasn't working at the time, so their household income was basically non-existent. Bills were stacking up, and they were on the brink of losing their apartment. I didn't even think twice before offering them space in my home. Family is family, right? I thought I'd be a good son. I was so wrong. They arrived a week later with a few suitcases and boxes of kitchen items. I'd cleared out the guest bedroom for them, along with the smaller third bedroom that I used as an office. I figured Teresa might appreciate some personal space. In the beginning, things were cordial. Teresa thanked me politely for letting them stay, and Dad repeatedly said how grateful he was. I showed them around the house, handed them an extra set of keys, and explained how I was willing to cover utilities for a while. I didn't mind. I was used to paying the bills on my own anyway, and I had some savings to cushion any unexpected increase in expenses. During that first week, Teresa was surprisingly helpful. She reorganized my messy pantry, folded my laundry, and even cooked dinner a couple of times. Dad chipped in by mowing the lawn and fixing a leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months. I let myself relax, thinking we'd get along just fine. Even so, I couldn't shake that odd feeling that Teresa's behavior was more about establishing control. She'd rearrange the living room furniture without asking or throw away items she considered useless. Dad would shrug, saying she was trying to be productive, but I started feeling like a guest in my own house. Still, I reminded myself that they were under a lot of stress. Dad was applying for jobs, though he complained about the lack of opportunities. Teresa talked about wanting to start a small online business, but she never elaborated beyond that. I tried to be supportive. I told them to take their time, to get back on their feet without worrying about deadlines. I believed they'd appreciate that freedom and not overstep. I had no idea how quickly I'd regret my generosity. I noticed small changes right away. Teresa replaced my favorite coffee brand with some cheap, bitter blend because she claimed it was more economical. She also went through my closet, pulling out clothes she deemed too worn out, and tossed them without asking. I confronted Dad about it, and he insisted Teresa meant well. He told me to be patient, that she had a knack for running a household, and maybe I could learn a thing or two from her. That stung. I'd been managing my own life just fine. I didn't need a lecture from someone who treated my personal belongings like garbage, but still, I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I figured they were both anxious about their uncertain future. Maybe Teresa was trying to prove she was useful. A few days later, she sat me down in the living room, asking if I could help her fund her online business idea. She wanted me to invest a significant sum into her project without offering any concrete plan. I told her politely that I wasn't comfortable handing over money without details. Her face hardened, and she abruptly ended the discussion. Dad seemed oblivious, or maybe he was just pretending not to notice the tension. Things escalated when I discovered Teresa had moved into the master bedroom. She claimed she and Dad needed more space. I found my belongings crammed into boxes in what used to be my own room, replaced by their suitcases and clothes. I was furious. I confronted Dad, but he muttered something about how he was too old to sleep in a cramped guest room. Teresa glared at me, daring me to argue. I felt powerless in my own house. Every attempt to enforce boundaries turned into a guilt trip about how they were struggling, and I needed to be more understanding. About a month after they moved in, Teresa decided to call me into the kitchen for a serious talk. Dad was there, arms folded, staring at the floor. She cut straight to the point. She believed I should start paying them rent for the master bedroom, since, in her mind, I was occupying space in their household. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. This was my house, purchased with my own money, yet here she was treating me like a freeloader. I glanced at Dad, expecting him to defend me, but he just avoided my eyes. He mumbled something about how Teresa was handling the finances now, so maybe it was fair to share costs. I was livid. I reminded them that I was already covering the mortgage, the utilities, and the groceries. Teresa blinked, saying she and Dad were providing me with a stable environment, so it only made sense that I contribute. I pointed out that I literally owned the house, but she shrugged off my words like I was being ridiculous. Dad spoke up, telling me not to make a scene, that we could come to an arrangement. He said that maybe paying a small rent would bring harmony and show I was committed to our family's well-being. I felt something snap. The betrayal was too obvious to ignore. Dad, my own father, was siding with this woman who was basically trying to extort me in my own home. I refused outright, telling them there was no way I'd pay a dime. Teresa's eyes flashed with anger. She threatened to stop cooking and cleaning if I didn't comply. She said if I was going to act like a child, I'd be treated like one. There was no mention of gratitude for the free living arrangement I'd already been providing. Instead of backing down, I started planning my next move. I knew that legally, the house was in my name. They had no lease, no ownership claim. They were essentially guests and overstaying their welcome. I decided to consult an attorney friend of mine. I didn't want an ugly confrontation, but I also refused to be bullied in my own home. My friend confirmed that I had every right to evict them if they wouldn't respect my terms. The thought of doing that to my own father weighed heavily on me, but Teresa was leaving me no choice. I also began documenting everything. I kept a record of the bills I was paying, the groceries I was buying, and the times Teresa made outrageous demands. I wrote down dates and even snapped photos of my possessions they'd tossed or stored away without permission. I wanted to build a solid case, just in case things escalated. Meanwhile, Dad grew more distant. Sometimes I'd see him in the living room, his head bowed, as Teresa barked orders about what needed to be cleaned or rearranged. He didn't seem happy, but he never contradicted her. It felt like he was letting her run the show, even when it hurt me. I tried talking to him in private, but every time I approached him, Teresa would miraculously appear. She'd either insert herself into the conversation or whisk him away on some errand. It was frustrating, like living with a guard dog that I never asked for. Eventually, I cornered Dad in the garage, asking if he truly believed I owed them rent. He shrugged, saying that Teresa was trying her best to keep us all afloat. Then he asked if I could just go along with it for the sake of peace. That was the final straw. There would be no peace for me until they were gone. I took a few days to strategize. On one hand, I could serve them an eviction notice right away, but I worried about the fallout. I knew Dad would resent me, and the rest of the family might see me as heartless. On the other hand, I couldn't stand another moment of Teresa's bizarre power plays. She was practically acting like the owner, redecorating and dictating how I should behave in my own space. And the rent demand was the final insult. So I decided I'd gather proof of how unreasonable she was and how Dad was complicit. If anyone questioned why I was taking such drastic steps, I'd have the receipts. While I was at work, Teresa began bringing in her own furniture, swapping out my dining table for some gaudy monstrosity she found online. She replaced my couch too, claiming the old one was uncomfortable for Dad's back. When I returned, I saw my furniture stacked in the garage, collecting dust. I checked my bank statements and noticed she hadn't bought any of these items with her own money. Dad sure wasn't working, so I had no idea where the funds came from. She might have taken out a loan or borrowed from someone. Either way, she was turning my house into a reflection of her taste, without consulting me. It got worse. She set new house rules, including a curfew that I apparently needed to follow if I wanted to maintain order. I'm an adult and I pay for everything, yet she acted like my mother. Dad shrugged when I confronted him. He said Teresa was trying to bring discipline and structure. That's when I realized he'd lost his backbone entirely. It felt like she was brainwashing him into thinking he was incapable of making decisions, and he believed it. That evening, Teresa called a family meeting in the living room. She handed me a typed list of rules she expected me to follow. It included ridiculous demands like keeping my bedroom door open at all times unless I was sleeping, not having guests over without her approval, and doing all the dishes by a certain hour. She declared that since I wasn't paying rent yet, these rules would ensure I earned my keep. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd tell her this was insane, but he just nodded solemnly. Something in me snapped. I decided that was the moment I'd put my plan into action. I refused to follow any of her rules. She threatened to lock the doors if I came home after her curfew. I told her that if she even tried that, I'd have the police escort me inside. Dad tried to intervene, telling me I was overreacting, but I saw the flicker of fear in Teresa's eyes. She realized I wasn't bluffing. From that point on, I ramped up my documentation. Every time she threatened me, I wrote it down. Every time she touched or moved my belongings, I took a photo. I contacted the utility companies to make sure everything was strictly in my name so there was no confusion about who was responsible for the bills. A week later, I handed them a written notice. It wasn't an official eviction yet, but it spelled out my boundaries. If they continued to violate my personal space and tried to charge me rent, I would legally evict them. Teresa scoffed, accusing me of betraying Dad. Dad pleaded with me to reconsider, but I held firm. I told them to either respect the fact that I owned the house and let me live as I wished, or find another place to stay. Teresa responded by doubling down. She stopped cooking for me, which was no loss, and started blasting music at odd hours to provoke me. She even posted a message on social media claiming I was an ungrateful brat who was mistreating my elderly father. Several relatives reached out, shocked by her story, but I calmly explained the truth. Most took my side once they heard the full picture, although I could sense some were skeptical. Dad, meanwhile, seemed torn. He told me he loved me, but begged me not to make Teresa mad. He said she was the best thing to happen to him since Mom passed away, which felt like a punch in the gut. It was as though he'd forgotten all the years we struggled together, the sacrifices we made. Still, I maintained my composure. I refused to let Teresa or Dad guilt-trip me. I consulted with my attorney friend again, who advised me to proceed with an official eviction if they refused to comply. I wrestled with the idea. Evicting my own father felt unforgivably harsh, but I also couldn't live under Teresa's tyranny. One night, I heard them arguing in the master bedroom. Teresa was shouting about how they needed to take control before I ruined everything. Dad's voice was muffled, but he sounded distressed. I wondered if there was any chance he'd snap out of it and side with me. The next morning, Teresa poured half a box of salt into my coffee grounds, presumably to punish me for ignoring her rules. I spat out my first sip, furious. That same day, I discovered she'd removed my laptop from my room. I found it downstairs with suspicious new programs installed, some budgeting software she must have thought would help her manage finances. It felt like an invasion of privacy. I finally reached my breaking point that afternoon. I marched into the living room where Teresa was watching some daytime talk show and told her I'd had enough. I gave her a final ultimatum: respect my home or get out. She sneered at me, then called Dad over to witness my meltdown. He ambled in, looking exhausted. Before she could rattle off her rehearsed insults, I dropped the bomb. I had already prepared official eviction papers with help from my attorney friend, and I intended to serve them if she continued her nonsense. Teresa's eyes widened and she let out a disbelieving laugh. She didn't think I'd actually follow through. But I did. I handed the papers to Dad, explaining that they had 30 days to vacate if they couldn't comply with my terms. Teresa screamed at me, called me ungrateful, accused me of abandoning my father, and even threatened to sue me for emotional distress. Dad just stood there, tears in his eyes. He asked how I could do this to him. My heart twisted in my chest, but I kept my resolve. This was the only way to reclaim my life from Teresa's tyranny. Teresa spent the next few days trying to rally family members against me. She painted me as some greedy homeowner who was kicking out her poor husband's father. Several relatives called or messaged me, asking why I was being so heartless. I calmly explained how Teresa had taken over my home, demanded I pay them rent, and systematically destroyed my peace of mind. I directed them to the evidence I'd been collecting. Some changed their tune once they saw how manipulative she'd been, while others urged me to find a middle ground. But there was no middle ground left. She'd crossed the line too many times. My father had stood by her side, enabling her every step of the way. On the day they finally left, I made sure to be there to watch them pack. Teresa hurled insults at me, claiming I'd regret kicking them out. Dad wouldn't look me in the eye. He mumbled that he had hoped I'd forgive him, but clearly, he hadn't realized the damage he'd done by siding with her. I helped them carry a few boxes to their car, more for Dad's sake than Teresa's, but the tension was thick. Teresa threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't apologize, and I just laughed in her face. I reminded her that she had no power over me anymore, and if she continued harassing me, I'd have a restraining order filed faster than she could say rent. They drove off, leaving behind a trail of bitterness. The next few days, I took stock of what they'd left. The master bedroom was a mess. Holes in the walls, scratched floors, and a broken door handle. Most of my furniture was shoved into the garage or the basement. I spent hours restoring my home to the way it was before they arrived. It felt liberating to reclaim my space, even if it meant cleaning up their literal and metaphorical mess. Part of me waited for Dad to call and apologize, but he never did. Instead, I heard through the grapevine that they were staying with one of Teresa's relatives now, someone who apparently had no idea what they were in for. I received a few snide texts from Teresa accusing me of breaking Dad's heart. I ignored them. I had no intention of forgiving or forgetting. I figured Dad made his choice, and Teresa revealed her true colors. They weren't my problem anymore. As for my reputation, all the evidence was on my side, and most of the family eventually recognized that Teresa was the toxic one. I never forgave him. I doubt I ever will. He chose Teresa over me, and I won't pretend otherwise. If he ever decides to leave her, maybe we'll talk, but I'm not holding my breath. My house is my sanctuary again, and I've learned the hard way that not all family deserves kindness. Sometimes you have to protect yourself, even from your own blood. Forever.